Hey everyone. Welcome back to Harryverse X. Get ready for an amazing tale. Isis and Osiris found Harry at from cupboard age 4 and raised the immortal god of magic and death. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Feather and the Scale. The night it happened, Isis was in the middle of a war. Not the kind with armies and bronze, she had seen enough of those to last 1,000 lifetimes. This was quieter and older and far more dangerous, a conflict of magical theory, a disagreement with a goddess who had been wrong for 6 centuries and refused to acknowledge it. The Hall of Enchantments in the Duat hummed with tension. Ra's morning bark had not yet begun its journey, so the realm was deep in its night cycle, every corridor of the afterlife lit by the cool blue phosphorescence that leaked from the walls of the dead. Isis won the argument, as she always did, and turned to go. That was when she felt it. It moved through the layers of existence like a stone dropped into still water, ripple after ripple of something enormous, something old, something that had no business happening in the mortal world in 1981. She stopped walking. Around her the corridor of the Duat went very quiet, the way a forest goes quiet before a predator moves through it. The torchlight dimmed. The spells inscribed on the walls flickered in their golden channels. Magic, she thought. Dying magic. And love. And, she was already moving before the thought finished. She found Osiris in the Hall of Two Truths, which was where he always was and always had been, sitting in the great cedar chair at the far end of the hall with his crook and flail resting across his knees. The 42 assessors of the dead lined the walls in their stillness, jackal-headed and patient, and the scales at the center of the room ticked quietly in the absence of a soul being judged. Anubis was there too, leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed, looking exactly as bored as a god of embalming was never supposed to look. I felt it, Osiris said, before she could speak. His voice was deep and unhurried, the voice of a man who had no reason to rush because he had all the time that had ever existed. Something cracked open. In Britain, Isis said. A child. Anubis uncrossed his arms. The lightning marked one. The prophecy child. He tilted his head, his dark eyes unreadable. The mortal seers have been watching that thread for years. We all felt Lily Potter's sacrifice. The love she called up, it was old magic. Older than the wizarding world knows how to measure. It opened a seam, Isis said. She was already at the edge of the hall, fingers tracing the boundary between worlds. The membrane was thin here, thinner than it had been in a long time, thin enough to see through, like ice over black water. She could see, distorted but real, the flickering light of a ruined village. She could smell smoke and autumn leaves and something else, something small and frightened and alive. Osiris. Come look at this. He rose from his chair without ceremony. That was one of the things she had always loved about him, he never made theater of his own dignity. He crossed the hall and stood beside her and looked through the seam she'd opened with her fingers. For a moment neither of them spoke. Dumbledore put him there, Osiris said finally. His voice was completely flat. Apparently. In the cupboard. I can see that. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive was not a place that warranted much description, because it was small and dark and smelled of dust and old shoes, and because no child should have been in it. Harry Potter was 4 years old. He was curled against the wall with his knees pulled to his chest and his glasses, too large for his face, held together on one side with sellotape, pushed up crookedly on his nose. He was not crying. That was the thing that made Isis's chest do something complicated. He was not crying. He had clearly learned, very early, that crying didn't bring anyone. He was talking quietly to himself, or perhaps to nothing, his voice barely above a whisper, the small, self-contained murmur of a child who had discovered that his own company was more reliable than anyone else's. And on his forehead, even in the dark, the lightning bolt scar pulsed with a faint gold light that had no business being there. She didn't put a repelling charm on it, Isis said. The seam. It's still open. The love residue from the sacrifice is keeping it open. Osiris studied the child through the gap between worlds. His expression was the one he wore when he was weighing something, not a soul on his scales, but a decision, which required different instruments entirely. He'll be sent to Hogwarts eventually. The old man has a plan. I know. The plan involves considerable suffering. I know that too. Osiris was quiet for another moment. Anubis had appeared at their shoulders without sound. He was very good at that, and was looking through the seam with an expression that was harder to read, because Anubis's face was built for ceremony rather than sentiment. But he watched the child for a long time, and when he finally spoke, what he said was, "The scar. There's something in it." Isis had already seen it. The scar was not just a wound. A wound healed or it scarred, and either way it was done. This was something else, a fragment of a broken soul, clinging to the only life it could reach after its host body was destroyed. Small, damaged, vicious in the way that cornered things are vicious. It pulsed against the child's natural magic like a splinter under skin. "Can you remove it?" Osiris asked. "Not from here. Not without," she paused. "Not without bringing him across." Another silence. This one stretched longer. Isis reached through the seam, carefully, because the gap between the mortal world and the Duat was not a door, it was a wound, and reaching through it required the kind of precision that even she had to concentrate for, and she touched the child's face. Not with her physical hand, which was on the other side of an enormous metaphysical distance, but with the part of her that was purely Heka, purely the magic that had existed before magic had a name. Harry Potter stopped murmuring. He looked up. Not at the wall or the door or the sliver of light under it, he looked directly at the seam, which from his side would have been invisible, a piece of darkness indistinguishable from the other darkness. But he looked straight at her. "Hello," he whispered. Osiris made a sound that was almost not a laugh. Isis pulled her hand back and turned to her husband. "We're taking him," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Osiris agreed, as if the decision had been made before she said it, as if it had been made the moment they looked through the seam and saw a 4-year-old boy sitting alone in the dark talking to himself because no one had left him anything better to talk to. "We are." The crossing was gentle. Isis made sure of it. She opened the seam properly, smoothed its edges, drew the membrane back the way you might fold back a curtain, slow and deliberate so the shift from one world to the other felt like falling asleep rather than like tearing. The magic of Lily Potter's sacrifice was still saturating the air around the cupboard, and it recognized something in Isis. Mother love knows mother love across any distance, and it helped, flowing around her working like a second pair of hands. Harry was asleep before they lifted him out of the cupboard. Not magically induced sleep, natural sleep, deep and immediate, the kind that comes when a child's body finally decides it is safe enough to stop guarding itself. He went limp in Isis's arms with his glasses askew and his too large shirt bunched under his chin, and he was so small, and she had held so many souls over so many centuries that she had believed herself incapable of surprise, but this surprised her, how fierce it came on. The protectiveness. The absolute conviction. Osiris watched her face and said nothing. Anubis went ahead to prepare. The walk through the Duat was not long, but it was never uneventful. The realm of the dead was not designed for the living, and even a child as magically saturated as Harry would need shielding from its deeper truths. Isis kept him wrapped in a working of her own Heka, a warm shell of insulating magic that softened the Duat's sharper edges, the chill of the void spaces between gates, the particular blue-black light of eternity that was beautiful to the dead and overwhelming to the living. She brought him to their house, and she always thought of it as a house rather than a palace, which was a small private rebellion against the grandeur that divine status insisted on, in the garden quarter of the Duat, where the fields of Aaru stretched green and gold beyond the windows and the smell of the mortal world's equivalent of morning drifted in through walls that were more suggestion than stone. She set him down on a bed that she assembled from Heka and cedar thought, and she sat beside him, and she waited. Osiris stood in the doorway. "The Dursleys will wake up and find him gone," he said. "Yes. Dumbledore will look. He won't find anything," Isis said. The seam is closed. It healed when I brought the child across. As far as every instrument the old wizard possesses is concerned, Harry Potter is exactly where he was left. She smoothed a wrinkle from the blanket. He'll check the wards periodically. He'll feel the boy's life signature in the blood wards. The blood connection to his aunt is what he used, and that still holds. I've threaded the boy's essence back through it so it reads true. Dumbledore will believe his calculations are working exactly as intended. Osiris considered this. That's elegant. Thank you. And eventually we'll need to address the fragment in the scar. Tomorrow, Isis said. Let him sleep first. Harry slept for 3 days, which was not unusual for a mortal child who had just crossed the boundary between worlds, even gently. During those 3 days Isis did not leave the room. She sat beside him and she worked. There was always working to be done, always some prayer or enchantment or cosmic administrative task that required the Mother of Magic's attention, but she did it quietly, with one eye always on the small boy in the cedar bed, and when he stirred in bad dreams she put her hand against his hair and spoke in the old language, the first language, the one that existed before words became words, and the dreams went still. The fragment of broken soul in his scar troubled her every time she looked at it. It was aware, in the dim and desperate way that damaged things are aware. It recognized where it was. The Duat and the Hall of Two Truths were not places a piece of Voldemort's soul had ever anticipated ending up, and its agitation was constant, a faint sick pulse against Harry's natural magic like a wrong note in an otherwise clean chord. On the morning of the 3rd day, Harry opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling for a while. He looked at the walls. He looked at the soft golden light that moved through the room in patterns that didn't correspond to any sun in the mortal world. He looked at Isis, who was sitting 3 feet away making a cosmological calculation on a piece of papyrus that didn't technically exist in physical space, and he said, "Are you a person?" Isis lowered the papyrus. "Yes," she said. "Are you a magic person?" "You could say that." Harry thought about this. He was sitting up now, his glasses still miraculously on his face, studying her with the focused intentness of a child who had learned to read a room before he could read a book. He was checking for threat. He was checking her hands, her face, the space behind her, all the exits. It should not have been a 4-year-old's instinct, and it made her want to find Vernon Dursley and have a very detailed conversation about choices, but she kept her expression easy and open and gave him something very simple to hold on to. "My name is Isis," she said. "I found you in your cupboard. You're safe here." He thought about that too, with the seriousness of someone who had been told things were fine before and had learned not to simply believe it. Then, where is here? "A place between places," she said. "A garden at the edge of everything. Nothing here can hurt you. Uncle Vernon can't, no. Can't get in. There is no door in this world that opens for Vernon Dursley," Isis said, and she let a little of the truth of that statement come through in her voice, not enough to frighten him, just enough to be a fact he could stand on. "I promise." Harry Potter looked at her for a long moment, 4 years old and already so careful, already so measured in his trust, and then something in his face shifted, not all the way, not completely, but enough. A small unbuckling. He pulled his knees up and rested his chin on them and looked out at the fields of Aaru through the window. "It's pretty here," he said. "It is. Are there other people?" "Many. Would you like to meet them?" "Maybe later," he said, which was very sensible, and Isis found herself suppressing something that might have been a smile. Osiris came in an hour afterward with food, real food, mortal food, because the Duat sustained its residence through means that would not have suited a 4-year-old stomach, and Osiris had sent 3 separate messengers to the mortal world to source things before settling on a plate of toast and boiled eggs and a cup of warm milk, which he presented with the grave dignity of a man who had never in several thousand years of existence made toast for a child and had discovered, apparently, that he found it deeply worthwhile. Harry ate everything. Then he looked at Osiris, at the green skin, at the crook and flail, at the white mummy wrappings that Osiris wore on formal occasions but had left on out of habit, and he said, with complete composure, "You're scary looking but you don't feel scary." Osiris blinked. That was a statement that had never, in several thousand years, been directed at him, and he appeared to process it carefully before responding, "Thank you. I think Uncle Vernon is pink and he feels really scary," Harry added, by way of explanation. "So it's not the looking part that matters." Osiris and Isis exchanged a look over the child's head. "No," Osiris agreed quietly. "It's not the looking part." They removed the fragment from his scar on the fourth day. Isis did most of the work. Osiris stood at the boundary of the room where his presence, the presence of the Lord of the Dead, would anchor the working without overwhelming the patient. Anubis was there too, because what they were doing was essentially a judgment on a piece of soul, and judgment was his function. Harry was awake for it. They had asked him if he wanted to be, which was something no one had asked him before, whether he wanted something that was going to happen to him anyway, and he had said yes with such immediate certainty that Isis filed it away, added it to the growing record she was already keeping of what this child needed and what had been done to him. She explained what she was going to do in terms a 4-year-old could hold. There was something in his scar that didn't belong to him. It was a piece of someone else's magic, someone broken and mean, and it had been sitting there since the night he got the scar, pressing against his own magic like a thumb on a bruise. She was going to take it out. It would hurt a little. Not as much as other things he had already felt. Harry considered this and then nodded. The extraction was delicate and it was not quick. Isis worked with her fingers in the hecaspace around the scar, following the threads of foreign soul matter where they tangled with his own magical core, separating them with a patience that was partly divine and partly something that felt more immediate and personal. Each time the fragment resisted, and it did resist, it hissed and pushed and called up memories of the night it got there, brief terrible flickers of green light and a woman's voice. Harry made a small sound but held completely still. After an hour she drew it free. It sat on her palm looking exactly like what it was, a ragged, hungry fragment of a man who had been afraid of death for so long that he'd torn his own soul apart to avoid it. It pulsed weakly. It was aware. It recognized Osiris across the room and the recognition was pure animal terror. "Weigh it," Osiris said to Anubis. Anubis produced the scales, they traveled with him as a concept rather than a physical object, always available, and placed the fragment on one side. The feather of Ma'at went on the other. The scales didn't balance. No one was surprised. Osiris looked at the fragment for a long moment with the expression of a man doing arithmetic on a vast and depressing scale. Then he said, "It is incomplete. It cannot be judged fully. But it cannot be returned and it cannot be left here." "Contain it," Isis said. He did. A gesture, a word in a language older than the Duat itself, and the fragment was sealed in a vessel of compressed eternity, not destroyed, because you could not destroy something you did not have the full measure of, and not sent back, because she would not allow it back near Harry. It went into Osiris's keeping, into a place in the Hall of Two Truths that was sealed 7 times over, and that was the end of that, for now. Harry had watched all of this with enormous eyes. "Was that the bad thing?" he asked Isis. "That was it, yes." He touched his scar. It didn't pulse anymore. The gold light was gone. It was just a scar, lightning-shaped, a little pink, entirely and simply his. His face ran through several complicated things and ended somewhere that looked like relief, which was the truest, most specific kind of healing. "Good," he said. Osiris crouched in front of him, not a thing he did often, given the general expectation that souls came to him rather than the reverse, but he did it now, bringing himself down to the child's level with the deliberate thoughtfulness of someone who understood that height is its own kind of power. He looked at Harry for a moment and Harry looked back. "Do you know what I am?" Osiris asked. "Isis said you're her husband and also king of the dead people." "That's accurate. Are you going to teach me things?" Osiris tilted his head. "What makes you ask?" Harry shrugged, small and precise. Because you keep looking at me like my scar used to look at me. Like you're deciding something. Osiris was quiet for long enough that Isis thought he was going to deflect, to retreat into his dignity. Instead he said, yes. I'm going to teach you things. If you want. Harry thought about it. What kind of things? The kind that matter, Osiris said. The kind they don't teach in cupboards. And Harry, who was 4 years old and had already been through more than most people faced in a lifetime, looked at the king of the dead and said, with the complete gravity of a child who takes important things seriously, okay. The years in the Duat were not years the way mortal years were years. Time in the realm of the dead moved differently, not faster or slower, exactly, but sideways, at an angle to mortal time, so that Harry could spend what felt like months in the Duat and surface in the mortal world to find only weeks had passed, or spend what felt like an afternoon in Aaru and return to Privet Drive to find a season had shifted. This was useful. This was, Isis suspected, one of the reasons the seam had stayed viable even after she'd repaired it. The universe, when it cracked open that night in 1981, had done something intentional. She didn't believe in accidents. She was too old for that. Harry grew up in both worlds simultaneously, which should have been disorienting and occasionally was but mostly was simply his life, the way bilingual children don't experience their two languages as strange but just as the full landscape of what language is. In the Duat he had the fields of Aaru, he had the 42 assessors who were terrible teachers of abstract subjects and surprisingly excellent teachers of observation and patience, he had Anubis who taught him, with characteristic straightforwardness, that death was a process and not an event and that understanding it removed approximately 90% of the fear most people carried around unnecessarily. He had Thoth, who arrived unannounced one afternoon and then became a semi-permanent fixture, teaching Harry hieroglyphs and astronomy and the mathematics that underpinned the structure of reality, which was frankly remarkable in a 7-year-old. He had Isis. She taught him Heka, the magic that existed before spellwork was codified, before wands were carved, before anyone wrote down incantations. Heka was not cast so much as spoken into being, and it required the practitioner to mean what they said with every layer of themselves at once, which was why most mortals couldn't access it and why Harry could, because Harry had been shaped in a place where meaning was the structural material. His first real working came at age 6, he healed a bird that Anubis had brought in from somewhere, a small brown thing with a broken wing, and the Heka moved through him clean and warm and he had looked up at Isis afterward with his face full of such pure startled joy that she had had to turn away for a moment. His wandless magic developed alongside his Heka, the two systems informing each other. The traditional wizarding spells he picked up from books Isis sourced from the mortal world. He read Hogwarts, a history at 8 and found it informative if slightly self-congratulatory, read magical theory at 9 and corrected 3 of its foundational assumptions in the margins with a pencil, in the clear precise handwriting of someone who had been taught by a god of scribes. He read about the wizarding world with the interested, slightly detached attention of someone learning the customs of a country they intended to visit. He also, periodically, had to go back to Privet Drive. This was the part Isis found hardest, not the visits themselves, because the Blood Ward needed maintenance and Harry's presence in the mortal world needed to remain consistent enough to satisfy Dumbledore's monitoring, but the fact of it. The Dursleys. She accompanied him always, kept herself in the space between visible and invisible, the place where she could act if she needed to and remain undetected if she didn't. Vernon Dursley managed to be the same person she had assessed at the first glance through the seam, and Petunia was a woman who had buried her real self under so many layers of resentment and propriety that she had almost forgotten what was down there. Harry handled them with a calm that was remarkable and slightly disconcerting. He had stopped being afraid of them somewhere around age 5, which coincided approximately with the period when Osiris had explained to him in patient detail the scale of what immortal actually meant, and after that he regarded the Dursleys the way you might regard an unpleasant but essentially powerless weather event. He did his chores. He said the right words. He did not engage. The only time Isis ever had to intervene directly was when Dudley broke his glasses for the 3rd time and Vernon raised his hand. She was across the space between worlds before the motion completed, and what Vernon Dursley experienced in that moment he would never be able to describe to anyone, only that he put his hand down and felt, for the rest of his life, a faint inexplicable unease whenever he walked past the cupboard under the stairs. "You could just let me curse him," Harry said, on the walk to school the following morning, his glasses repaired with Heka and a very small working that he executed so automatically it barely registered as magic. "I could," Isis said, matching his pace. She looked exactly like a regular woman in this form, dark-haired, tall, with the quality of paying absolute attention to whatever she looked at that made most people find her slightly unsettling and most children find her completely trustworthy. "But then we would be answering his smallness with power, and that makes us smaller." Harry thought about this. "What if I want to be a little smaller sometimes?" "You can be. When you're older and when it's something that genuinely needs answering." "Vernon Dursley," she said, with a precision that was its own verdict, "does not." Harry accepted this. He was very good at accepting things that were framed as true rather than as rules, which was why Isis had always been careful to explain the actual reason behind the boundaries she set for him rather than just issuing them. Rules issued without reasons were for people who needed to control rather than teach. She was his mother. She was not interested in control. The letter came when he was 10, which was slightly early. The Hogwarts owl had apparently been trying to deliver to the cupboard under the stairs at Privet Drive for several weeks before successfully locating him in the Duat, which said something interesting about the school's enchantments that Isis filed away for later consideration. The owl itself appeared in the middle of a Heka lesson looking mildly deranged, deposited the letter on Harry's knee with the relieved air of something that had fulfilled a very complicated divine contract, and left immediately. Harry turned the letter over. Examined the wax seal. Read the front. Mr. H. Potter, the Duat, the Field of Aaru, third house on the left. He showed it to Isis. She looked at the address for a long moment and then made a sound that was, absolutely, a laugh, even though she would deny it if asked. "They found you," she said. "They really did." He cracked the seal and read. He read it twice, once quickly, once slowly, which was his habit with things he wanted to think about properly. He set it down on the floor in front of him and looked at it for a minute. "I knew this was coming." "Yes. But it still feels strange." He looked up at her. "Is it going to be, I mean? They're going to look at me like I'm something." "They are," Isis agreed. "And I'm not supposed to, you're not supposed to pretend," she said, because that was the principle they had always operated on. Not hiding, not performing, just the specific form of discretion that was about timing and context rather than shame. You don't have to announce yourself. But you don't have to make yourself small either. Ever. Harry looked at the letter again. Then he said, with the dry humor that had been developing since he was about 8 and spending too much time with Thoth, "Hogwarts is going to be very surprised." "Yes," Isis said. "About several things." "Almost certainly." "Good," he said, and there was something in the word that was not arrogance and was not bravado but was simply the deep, quiet readiness of someone who knew exactly who they were and was not particularly interested in being convinced otherwise. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. Outside the house in Aaru, the fields were gold in the eternal not-quite afternoon. Osiris was somewhere in the Hall of Two Truths doing the administrative work that death required in perpetuity. Anubis was, as he always was, everywhere at once. The Duat was alive around them, ancient and patient and vast. Harry Potter, who was 10 years old and carried Heka in his blood and death's understanding in his chest and love in the only place that mattered, who had been raised between worlds and was afraid of exactly nothing that currently existed and only slightly cautious about things that didn't yet, picked up his lesson materials from the floor and looked at his mother. "Can we finish the working?" he said. "The one about undoing curses." "I almost had it." "You had it," Isis said. "You were just second-guessing yourself." "Maybe," he said. "Show me again." She did. The afternoon light moved slowly through the house that was not quite a house, in the realm that was not quite a world, and the boy who would arrive at Hogwarts the following September sat cross-legged on the floor of eternity and learned the first language of magic from the woman who had given it to the world, and it was a perfectly ordinary afternoon, which was the best possible kind. A year later, standing on platform 9 3/4 with a trunk full of books and an owl he'd named Mott, who was calmer than Hedwig ever would have been and significantly more judgmental, Harry James Potter would walk through the barrier from the mortal world into something that thought it already knew who he was. It did not. But it was going to learn. Chapter 2, The boy who arrived. The Hogwarts Express left at 11, which meant Harry was on the platform at 10:15, which meant he had 45 minutes to stand in the middle of the most concentrated gathering of wizarding families he had ever encountered and take stock. He was good at taking stock. The platform was loud in the specific way that annual rituals are loud, everyone performing a version of the same goodbye, the same excitement, the same careful bravado over genuine nervousness, with enough magical accidents from first years losing control of their nerves to keep the air smelling faintly of burnt sugar and something sulphurous. Harry stood with his trunk and watched. Mott sat on top of the trunk in her cage and watched too, with the focused disdain of an owl who had been raised in the Duat and found the mortal world's noise somewhat beneath her. He spotted the red-haired family immediately, hard not to. There were 7 of them at minimum, all variations on the same ginger theme, filling a considerable section of platform with cheerful, disorganized energy. He noted the twins doing something to the youngest boy's luggage that the youngest boy hadn't noticed yet. He noted the only girl pressing her face to her mother's shoulder to hide that she was crying. He noted the mother herself, sturdy, warm, the particular kind of capable that came from managing chaos so long it stopped being chaos and became just life. He noted the boy his age, Ron, probably, given process of elimination, who was watching the twins with the expression of someone who had been on the receiving end of whatever they were doing too many times to be genuinely surprised but remained, somehow, perpetually aggrieved by it. Harry picked up his trunk, tucked Mott under his arm, and found a compartment. He was reading, Magical Drafts and Potions, which he'd already read twice but which had a section on interaction effects between potion bases and Heka-infused blood that he found genuinely interesting in a way the author clearly hadn't intended, when the compartment door opened and Ron Weasley looked in with his rat in one hand and a question already forming on his face. "D'you mind? Everywhere else is full." "Sit down," Harry said, without looking up. Ron sat. There was a comfortable silence for about 3 minutes, which was actually a fairly good sign. People who could manage comfortable silences in the first 3 minutes of meeting a stranger were generally worth knowing. Then Ron said, "Is that a real owl?" Harry looked up. Mott was staring at Ron with the expression she used for things she hadn't decided about yet. "Yes. She's brilliant." "What's her name?" "Mott." Like the Egyptian, Ron stopped. Blinked. "My dad's obsessed with ancient Egypt. Magical traditions and all that." "You're not, I mean, why would you? It's a long story," Harry said. "Right." Ron looked at his rat, who was asleep and contributing nothing to the conversation. He looked back up. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." Ron's mouth opened. Then closed. He was quiet for long enough that Harry went back to his book, because the reaction was one he'd been expecting and he'd decided some time ago that the most effective way to handle it was to simply not perform anything, no deflection, no over-explanation, no performed humility. Just let the moment settle on its own. "Sorry," Ron said finally. "It's just, everyone knows your name." "I know," Harry said. "Does that bother you?" Harry considered this properly, which Ron apparently hadn't expected, the genuine consideration, the pause that meant actual thought rather than deflection. "Not really," Harry said. "People knowing my name and people knowing me are different things. Most people only get the first one." Ron looked at him steadily for a moment, reassessing something. Yeah. That's fair." He paused. "What's it like? Growing up, I mean, you were with relatives, weren't you?" "That's what everyone, not exactly," Harry said. Ron waited. Harry looked at him, at the frank, guileless quality of the question, at the absence of strategy in it. Ron Weasley asked things because he wanted to know, not because he wanted leverage, and felt the small familiar calculus complete itself. "Not everything. But something true." I grew up in a lot of different places, Harry said. My relatives were part of it. But I had other family. It's complicated. Magic family? Very. Ron seemed to accept this as categorically sufficient, which endeared him considerably. He held out a chocolate frog. Want one? Harry took it. The frog leaped immediately and he caught it without looking, which made Ron laugh. Hermione Granger arrived 40 minutes into the journey looking for a toad, found no toad but found Harry and Ron, assessed the compartment with the rapid efficiency of someone who had been told repeatedly that she thought too much and had decided that this was their problem, not hers, and said, "You've got dirt on your nose. And you're Harry Potter." "The second one's been established," Ron said. "The first one is," he checked. "Actually true." Harry rubbed his nose. "Any luck with the toad?" "Not yet. His name is Trevor and he belongs to the round-faced boy, Neville, who's nearly in tears about it, and I think the twins in carriage 4 have seen him but won't say." She paused. "Are you actually Harry Potter?" "Yes," Harry said. "Sit down if you want. We'll help with the toad." She sat. She looked at Mott. She looked at Harry's book. Her eyes went wide in the specific way of someone who has just spotted a title on a shelf and immediately wants to have read it. "That's a pre-Greco-Roman text on potion interaction effects. The 1843 translation is considered incomplete. There are 30 pages in the original Arabic. I have the Arabic version," Harry said. "It's better." Hermione stared at him. Then she pulled out her own book, Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, heavily annotated in blue ink, and appeared to reach some kind of internal conclusion, because she settled into the corner of the seat and stopped performing the impression of someone about to leave. Trevor the Toad was found 20 minutes later in carriage 7. Harry located him using a minor working that he kept low and quiet, not a spell exactly, just a gentle expansion of awareness, the way Isis had taught him to reach, feel for the thread, and the Toad's small frightened presence was obvious once he bothered to look. He sent a nudge of direction to Ron wordlessly, a brush of knowledge rather than a verbal instruction, and Ron blinked and said, "Oh, carriage 7. With the slightly confused air of someone who had just had a thought they weren't sure was theirs. Harry said nothing. Ron went and got the toad. When he came back with a deeply relieved Neville Longbottom in tow, Harry looked at Neville and saw a boy who was holding himself like he expected to be found wanting. The posture was familiar. Not identical to what Harry knew from his own early years, but the same category, a child who had internalized someone else's low expectations so deeply that he was now enforcing them on himself. "Hi," Harry said. "I'm Harry. Sit down, we're almost there." Neville sat down with the stunned look of someone who has braced for something and found nothing to brace against. Hogwarts, seen from the lake in the blue dark of a September evening, was genuinely beautiful. Harry looked at it from the prow of a small boat, with Hermione on one side performing the mental effort of not audibly cataloguing its architectural features and Ron on the other eating the last of his chocolate frogs, and felt something move in his chest that was partly recognition and partly something else. Something like the moment before a river changes its course. He had known this was coming for years. He had read about this place, prepared for it, approached it with the intellectual curiosity he brought to any new environment. But knowing a thing and standing in front of it were different, and Hogwarts at night, lit from within and mirrored in black water, was asking something of him that he found genuinely worth giving. "Brilliant," Ron breathed beside him. "It is," Harry agreed. The boats ground onto the shore and Hagrid, enormous, loud, somehow immediately trustworthy in the way that very large gentle things often were, herded them toward the castle doors with the cheerful authority of a man who had done this exact thing enough times that he performed it from love rather than obligation. He called Harry's name with a recognition that was warm rather than worshipful, and Harry responded to it naturally, without the stiffness that celebrity usually produced in its subjects. Inside, they gathered in a small antechamber while McGonagall explained the sorting with the crisp efficiency of a woman who respected her students enough not to waste their time. Harry listened. Around him the other first years cycled through versions of anxiety, some showing it, some hiding it badly, some hiding it well. He watched them with the interest of someone who found people genuinely fascinating, which was different from the interest of someone who watched people to assess threat, though he did that too. Draco Malfoy introduced himself in the antechamber. Harry had seen him briefly on the platform, blond, well-dressed, moving through the crowd with the particular confidence of someone who had been told their whole life that the crowd was there for their convenience. He appeared in Harry's peripheral vision with a friend on each side and said, "You're Potter." "Still yes," Harry said. The blond boy blinked. That wasn't the response the setup was designed to receive. He adjusted smoothly. Harry gave him credit for that, the adjustment was quick. "Draco Malfoy," he said, extending his hand. "I can help you. Navigating all this. There are right people to know and wrong people." His eyes moved to Ron, carrying a verdict that had been formed long before the meeting. Harry looked at the extended hand. He looked at Draco Malfoy, at the practiced ease of the performance, at the genuine intelligence underneath it and the genuine insecurity underneath that. He was not angry. He was not impressed. He was just honest. "I think I can work out who I want to know myself," Harry said pleasantly. "But thanks." Draco's hand dropped. The smooth surface flickered. "Most people would want the help." "I'm not most people," Harry said, and turned back to talk to Ron. The sorting hat was an object of genuine interest. Harry had read about it, naturally, a thinking cap enchanted with the four founders' magic, capable of genuine assessment and decision. As an artifact of applied consciousness it was impressive work. He watched it sort the other students with attention, Hermione into Gryffindor with no hesitation at all, Neville into Gryffindor after a pause that seemed like the hat was genuinely wrestling with it, Draco into Slytherin in under 3 seconds. When his name was called, the hall went very still. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and the hat dropped over his eyes. Inside it was warm and dark and then, immediately, a presence. The hat was not just an object, it was a constructed intelligence, something with genuine, if constrained, sentience, and it touched his mind with the curious reaching energy of something that was made to reach. It went quiet very fast. "Well," it said, and the word carried a quality Harry didn't often hear from magical objects or people either, genuine surprise. "I haven't felt anything like this in 1,000 years." "Hello," Harry said. "You've been in the Duat." It wasn't a question. The hat was touching the edges of his mind and finding, instead of the neat organized anxieties and ambitions it usually sorted through, something that was partly mortal boy and partly something far older and layered, like geological strata. "You carry Heka. And death's understanding. And, a long pause, love. That's interesting. That's the loudest thing, actually. Everything else is extraordinary but the love is the loudest. My mother taught me." "Which one?" Harry almost smiled under the hat. "The one who matters." The hat was quiet for another moment, clearly doing actual thinking rather than just processing. "Where do I put you?" "You do in any house. Slytherin for ambition and intelligence, Ravenclaw for knowledge, Hufflepuff for loyalty and the groundedness you carry, you're very grounded for someone who lives between worlds. But the love," another pause. "Love like that, the foundational kind, the Lily Potter kind and the older kind both, that's Gryffindor. Even when Gryffindors are foolish, they're foolish because they love things. You're not going to be foolish. But the principle's the same." "Whenever you're ready," Harry said. "Gryffindor." The hat shouted. The Gryffindor table erupted. The rest of the hall was still doing the thing where everyone who'd gone quiet when his name was called was now exchanging looks. He could feel it without seeing it, the wave of recalibration, 1,000 people simultaneously revising their mental image of the boy who lived against the actual boy who was now sitting down next to Hermione and helping himself to roast chicken. "How was it?" Hermione asked immediately. "The hat. What was it like? Did it speak?" "The books say it deliberates but some accounts suggest it just knows and the speaking is, it's a genuine intelligence," Harry said. It thinks. It surprised me, actually. Hermione's eyes went wide. Surprised you how? By being more interesting than expected, he said, and she looked so satisfied by this answer, the confirmation that there was depth to investigate, that she immediately started writing something in the margin of a small notebook she produced from somewhere. Ron passed him a bowl of something orange. Brilliant entrance, mate. You could have heard a pin drop. I didn't do anything. That's what made it brilliant, Ron said philosophically, and loaded his plate. The days arranged themselves. Classes were interesting in the way that seeing a familiar thing from a new angle was interesting. The magic of the wizarding world was codified and systematic in ways that Hecka was not, and Harry found genuine value in learning its logic even where the logic was incomplete or built on foundations that didn't quite hold up to what he knew. He was a good student, not showy, not competitive, just genuinely engaged, asking questions that occasionally made teachers pause in the specific way that good questions made teachers pause. Flitwick, in their second charms lesson, asked the class to levitate a feather using Wingardium Leviosa. Most of the class produced nothing on the first attempt. Hermione produced a perfectly levitating feather on the second and looked immediately at Harry to see how he was doing, because Hermione's competitive instinct was the kind that needed to know where everyone was positioned at all times. Harry was looking at the feather. He said the incantation. The feather rose. It rose smoothly and completely, not wobbling, and when it reached eye level it stayed there without visible effort, like something suspended from above rather than pushed from below. Flitwick made a delighted sound and Harry let the feather back down and made a small note in his textbook about the wrist motion being unnecessary. The incantation was doing the conceptual work, the wrist was habit, and then looked up and found Flitwick beaming at him with the expression of a teacher who had just seen something that would feature in his recollections for years. Excellent, Mr. Potter. Exceptional control. Thank you, Professor. He didn't perform false modesty. He also didn't perform triumph. He just moved on, which was its own kind of unusual. Potions was a different affair entirely. Snape's entrance was theatrical in the way that all performances built to intimidate were theatrical, the sweep, the pause, the opening address about the precise art, about glory and power and the closed minds of those who couldn't manage it. Harry listened to the whole thing with the interest he brought to any new person, reading the layers, the genuine intelligence, the anger that hadn't fully cooled from a source well before any of them were born, the specific quality of the way his eyes moved to Harry when he said fame and celebrity. The questions came. Potter. Snape's voice was designed to carry. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Draught of living death, Harry said. Though the interaction between asphodel and wormwood is pH sensitive, if your water source has high mineral content it affects the potency significantly. You'd need to adjust the root ratio. A silence. Not the silence of someone caught off guard, exactly, Snape was too controlled for that, but a silence of recalibration. Where, Snape said, did you read that? A pre-Greco-Roman text on interaction effects. The standard translation doesn't include it. The original Arabic is clearer. Another silence. Different quality. Where would a first year obtain a pre-Greco-Roman? I have interesting family, Harry said pleasantly. Snape looked at him for a long moment, and Snape's looking was not ordinary looking, it had edges, it was trying to get under the surface of things, and found, Harry suspected, something he had not anticipated. Not arrogance. Not performance. Just the honest fact of a boy who knew things and wasn't embarrassed about it. Snape moved on to Neville's cauldron, which was beginning to emit a worrying smell, and the interrogation was over. He was trying to embarrass you, Ron said at dinner, with the indignation of someone who hadn't been involved but had principles about fairness. I know, Harry said. Didn't work. No. How did you know all that potion stuff? Harry looked at Ron. Thoth taught me the mathematics of compound effects when I was 8. I applied it to potion theory last year. It's the same structure, just different variables. Ron stared at him. Who's Thoth? God of wisdom and scribes. Very particular about proper notation. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Mate, he said finally, I feel like there's a very large story I'm missing. There is, Harry agreed. I'll tell you some of it at some point. Just some. Some of it's not mine to tell, Harry said, honestly. And some of it you'd need about 3 years to properly understand. Ron considered this with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who had grown up in a household where magic was simply a fact of life and therefore strange things had long since lost the capacity to be deal-breakers. Fair enough, he said, and went back to his dinner. The first time Harry's power announced itself publicly, not a controlled demonstration in class but something involuntary, something the situation pulled out of him, it was over Neville Longbottom and a broomstick. They were in the entrance courtyard. Madame Hooch was running their first flying lesson with the weary patience of someone who had presided over enough first-year disasters to have developed a very specific relationship with hope. Most of the class managed the basic command, up, with varying degrees of success. Neville, whose broomstick shot up immediately when commanded because apparently the brooms had no way of assessing confidence, was briefly airborne and then briefly not, tumbling sideways before reaching 10 feet. Harry was off his broom and moving before he'd consciously decided to, not toward Neville, because Neville landed with a thud and a yelp but was essentially intact, just winded, but toward the remembrall that had flown loose from Neville's pocket and was sailing in a long arc toward the stone wall at the far end of the courtyard. He caught it one-handed from 10 feet away, which required a short burst of something that wasn't quite a accio but produced the same effect. The remembrall's trajectory bent slightly, helpfully, toward his outstretched hand. He gave it to Neville, who was still on the ground looking slightly concussed. Here. Neville looked at the remembrall. Then at Harry. That was 20 feet away. 10, Harry said. Can you wiggle your fingers? Neville wiggled his fingers, confirmed they worked, and allowed Harry to help him upright. Madame Hooch arrived, checked Neville's wrist, and then turned on Harry with the expression of a woman who was very clear on the rules. What did you just do? Caught it, Harry said. You were off your broom, Neville needed help. Mr. Potter, the rules about unauthorized, with respect, Professor, Harry said, not unkindly, the rule is about unauthorized flying. I didn't fly. I caught a falling object. He paused. I also think Neville might need to see Madame Pomfrey, his wrist is swollen. Madame Hooch looked at Neville's wrist. Looked at Harry. The reprimand recalibrated itself into something that was still firm but had lost its certainty. We will discuss this, she said. Of course, Harry said agreeably. What they discussed, it turned out, was Harry trying out for the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Wood appeared at dinner that evening with the focused energy of a captain who had just received intelligence he hadn't known he needed. He explained the situation, which was that he had just spoken with McGonagall. She saw what you did in the courtyard, apparently it's all anyone's talking about, I don't know how it's all anyone's talking about already but, and that they had a seeker position open and that he had a practice tomorrow and that Harry should be there. Can I think about it? Harry asked. Wood looked stricken in the way people did when they hadn't budgeted for the word no appearing anywhere in a conversation. Of course, he managed. I mean yes. Of course. But, think quickly. Please. Harry looked at Ron, who was already vibrating with enough second-hand excitement to power something. Youngest seeker in a century, Ron said. Mate. Youngest seeker in a century. I know. You have to. Harry looked at Hermione, who was monitoring the exchange with her arms folded and a smile she was mostly suppressing. What do you think? He asked her. She abandoned the suppression. I think you'll be bored if you don't have something physical to do and I think Ron will implode if you say no. Ron pointed at her. That's exactly right. All right, Harry told Wood. October arrived, and with it the first hints of what Hogwarts had locked in its dungeons. Harry had known about the third-floor corridor from day one, McGonagall's address made it difficult to miss. He had also known, from a careful 30 seconds of applied awareness on the first evening, that whatever was down there was significant. He could feel it the way he could feel the fragment of Voldemort's soul in his scar had felt before Isis removed it, something with mass and intention, something that had been put somewhere and was being kept there. He mentioned it to Ron and Hermione in the library on a Wednesday evening in mid-October, between their Transfiguration essay and a dispute about whether the restricted section kept anything genuinely dangerous or just things the school administration found inconvenient. "There's something in the third-floor corridor," he said. "Under the trapdoor." Ron looked up from his essay. "How do you know there's a trapdoor?" "Because there's something that needs a floor between it and us," Harry said. "It's big. And it's guarding something. The guarding is almost louder than the thing itself, layers of enchantments, multiple protections. Whoever set that up wasn't planning on anyone getting through casually." Hermione lowered her book slowly. "How are you sensing any of this?" Harry looked at her. She was watching him with the precise attention she gave to phenomena she couldn't immediately explain and had decided to understand rather than dismiss. He liked this about her enormously. He had known, from the first real conversation on the train, that Hermione Granger was someone who would eventually know most of his story, not because he told it all at once but because she would simply work it out, piece by piece, and come to him with each piece to confirm it rather than to be surprised. "I'll tell you both properly at some point," he said. "But the short version is that I grew up learning to feel for the shape of magical workings. The way someone who grows up near the sea learns to read water." Hermione was silent for a moment. "Then, where did you grow up?" "Between here and somewhere else," Harry said. "Somewhere older." She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Then she looked at the table and picked up her quill and said, very deliberately, "Fine. But you're going to tell me." "Not because I'm nosy, you're also nosy," Ron said. "But because if we're going to be involved in whatever this third-floor business is, I need to understand what we're working with." "You're not wrong," Harry said. He didn't tell her she didn't have to be involved, because that would have been insulting to a girl who had already decided she was involved and had sufficient grounds for the decision. "I'll tell you. I will. But right now, does either of you know anything about Nicholas Flamel?" The name landed in the air. Ron frowned. Hermione's quill stopped. "The name's familiar," Hermione said slowly. "I've read it somewhere. Recently." In something, she was already pulling books toward her, the focused urgency of someone following a thread. "Give me tonight." "Take whatever you need," Harry said, and went back to his essay, calm and unhurried, the eye of a storm that was still deciding when to move. 3 weeks later, in a corridor near the library where they'd stopped to wait out a rainstorm coming in through a cracked window, Harry looked up at the sound of something large and three-headed moving in the floor above them, and he turned to Ron and Hermione with an expression that was interested rather than afraid. "It's a Cerberus," he said. "Well, a European version of one. Fewer heads in the original mythology, but the adaptation's impressive. Someone went to real trouble." Ron stared at the ceiling. "You're not even slightly bothered." "I know what they guard," Harry said. "And I know what they like." He paused. "Music. They like music. It's in the old texts." Hermione looked at him. Then at the ceiling. Then back at him. "Harry," she said, and her voice had the quality it got when she was on the edge of something she needed to say clearly, "exactly how much do you know about what's up there?" "Enough," he said. "And the thing it's guarding?" "Not everything yet," he said honestly. "But enough of that too." He looked at her, at the rain light on her face, at the patience she was exercising on his behalf. "Flamel uses it to store the Philosopher's Stone. It was moved to Hogwarts for protection a few months ago. Someone's trying to steal it, and whoever that someone is, they're already in this building." A silence. Outside the cracked window, rain fell in curtains. "In this building," Ron repeated. "Yes. As in, a teacher?" Harry turned and began walking. "Let's go to dinner," he said. I'll tell you what I think over food. He didn't look worried. He didn't look like someone carrying a secret weight or steeling himself against a coming storm. He walked through the corridor with the easy, self-contained stride of someone who had decided to engage with something because it was worth engaging with, not because he was afraid of what happened if he didn't. Behind him, Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. He's not afraid of any of it, Ron said quietly. Not with awe exactly, more with the bewildered appreciation of someone watching something work beautifully without quite understanding how. I know, Hermione said. Should we be more worried than he is? Hermione thought about Harry Potter, who had caught a remembrall from 10 feet away without appearing to think about it, who had known the contents of the third-floor corridor by feel, who had read a pre-Greco-Roman text in Arabic at 11 and corrected it, who had called a god of wisdom by first name as if it were unremarkable. I don't think so, she said. I think he just knows things we don't. Ron nodded slowly. Right. Brilliant. He paused. Also mildly terrifying. Yes, Hermione agreed. Come on. They followed him to dinner, and the stone sat in the dark under 3 heads and a trapdoor, and the year turned slowly toward winter, and Harry Potter ate his shepherd's pie and talked and laughed and felt, for the first time in his life, the specific pleasure of being exactly where he was supposed to be, not because someone had planned it, not because a prophecy had placed him, but because he had chosen it. That was the difference. That was everything. Chapter 3, What Lives in the Dark. The first snow came in November and brought Quidditch with it. Harry found that he loved flying the way he loved most physical things, cleanly, without drama, the way a body that had been trained to understand its own capabilities finds its natural expression. On a broomstick at 200 feet with the Hogwarts grounds spread white and grey below him and the wind doing everything it wanted with his hair, something in him settled that the classroom and the library couldn't quite reach. Not peace exactly. Something more active than peace. Readiness. Oliver Wood had organized them into a team that functioned partly on talent and partly on his own considerable force of will, and Harry respected this about him even when Wood's pre-match addresses ran 20 minutes longer than they needed to. The team responded to Harry with the particular dynamic that sometimes emerged when someone's competence was obvious enough to skip the proving stage entirely, no resentment, just the practical adjustment of people who had recalibrated their expectations and found the new arrangement better. The first match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Harry caught the snitch in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He saw it early, that was all it was, seeing it early and then closing the distance with the economy of someone who didn't waste motion. The Slytherin seeker, Terence Higgs, was good, and Harry acknowledged this privately, but he had spotted the snitch hovering 6 inches above the left goalpost at the 2-minute mark and had simply flown toward it in a long, casual arc that looked like aimless circling until it didn't, and by the time Higgs understood what was happening, the match was over. The stands were making an enormous noise. Harry landed and handed the snitch to Wood, who looked like a man experiencing a religious event. 4 minutes, Wood said. It was right there, Harry said. 4 minutes. Oliver. It's fine. Wood gripped both his shoulders. We are going to win the cup, he said, with the conviction of a prophet. Do you understand me? We are going to, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Harry said, and extracted himself gently. In the stands, through the noise, he found Hermione and Ron. By the particular quality of Ron's yelling, which was wholehearted and specific, he was not just celebrating generically but doing a detailed real-time commentary on what had just happened to anyone within range who had missed it, which given the noise seemed to be no one but which didn't diminish his enthusiasm. Hermione was clapping with both hands in a manner that was slightly more composed but no less genuine. He also found, without looking for it, the cold thread of something wrong. It came from the staff stands. A specific direction, a specific presence, someone whose attention on him had an edge to it that the crowd's attention didn't. He didn't break his stride or change his expression. He let his awareness move toward it the way water moves toward low ground, naturally and without announcement. Quirrell. Professor Quirinus Quirrell, who taught defense against the dark arts with the persistent nervous energy of a man holding something too large and too hot and trying not to drop it. Harry had noticed him on the first day, noticed the stutter, the turban, the way he moved through spaces like he was trying to take up less room than he occupied, and had set him aside as something to return to, the way you set aside a book you intend to read properly when you have more time. But in the staff stands during the match, Quirrell was not stuttering. His lips were moving. His eyes were on Harry's broomstick. Harry's broom lurched. It was a small lurch, a brief violent jerk that translated, at 200 feet, into a startling loss of directional control. He corrected immediately, instinctively, with a burst of stabilizing hecka that he ran through the broomstick's enchantment so smoothly it looked like normal flying adjustment. His grip tightened. His jaw did not. Jinx, he thought. Mild. Aimed at the broom rather than at him. Whoever was casting it was skilled enough to use the broom as a vector but hadn't anticipated the broom's enchantments interacting with Harry's own magical field, which muted the effect considerably. He let the broom jerk twice more, deliberately, convincingly, giving the appearance of genuine struggle, and then caught the snitch on what looked like a desperate dive and could read, if you knew what you were looking at, as something else entirely. He knew what he was looking at. On the ground, Hermione shoved through the crowd to reach him with her robes singed at the hem and her expression carrying the very specific energy of someone who had just done something decisive and was working out how to describe it. "Your broom," she said. "Someone was, I know," Harry said quietly. "I set Snape's robes on fire," she said. "I was trying to break his eye contact with your," she stopped. "Read his face. It wasn't Snape." "No." She was quiet for a moment, running it back. "Quirrell," she said. "Not a question." "Yes. I set the wrong person's robes on fire." "Snape's fine," Harry said. "He doesn't hold grudges about accidents." He paused. "He holds grudges about everything else, but not accidents." Hermione rubbed her face. "Right. So Quirrell was cursing your broom during the match. Trying to. And you caught the snitch anyway." "It was right there," Harry said again. She stared at him. "You could have told me you had it handled. I ran across 3 rows of seats." "I know. I'm sorry." He meant it. "I didn't want you doing anything visible. If he knows he's been identified, he'll change approach," she finished. "Yes. I understand." She looked back at the dispersing crowd, at Quirrell's distant back, at the way he moved through the celebratory chaos with the small, contained movements of a man trying to be forgettable. "Why? What does he want with you?" "It's not me specifically," Harry said. "Not yet. He wants the stone." He looked at her steadily. "And I think he's closer to getting through the protections than Dumbledore knows." Hermione pulled her robe straight. The singed hem steamed slightly in the cold. "Then we need to know more about what's down there," she said, with the calm practicality of someone who had decided that being frightened was less useful than being informed. "Specifically what's between the Cerberus and the stone." "I've been working on that," Harry said. "How?" "Library. Letters. Other sources." "What other sources?" He looked at her. She looked back. The question was the same one she'd been moving toward since the train, patient and incremental, building a picture from accumulated evidence the way she built everything, carefully, honestly, without rushing to conclusions. "Come on," he said. "Let's find Ron. I'll tell you both." He told them that evening in the Gryffindor common room, late, when the fire had died to red coals and most of the tower had gone to bed. Not everything, not Osiris in the Hall of Two Truths, not the crossing, not the years in the Duat in full detail. But enough. He told them about Isis and Osiris. He told them about the Heka, about growing up between worlds, about what it meant to have been raised by gods who were ancient when the wizarding world's oldest traditions were new. Ron listened with his legs pulled under him and his expression cycling through surprise, acceptance, surprise again, and finally a kind of settled wonder that was very Ron, not overwhelmed, not disbelieving, just recalibrating in real time with good humor. So when you said Thoth taught me, he said slowly. I meant Thoth the god, yes. Right. Ron nodded. Right, okay. You're taking this very well, Hermione said to him. My family flies on broomsticks and turns rats into water goblets, Ron said reasonably. The scale's already pretty wide. Hermione turned back to Harry. She had not interrupted the telling at all, which for Hermione was a significant exercise of restraint, and he could see the questions lined up behind her eyes in order of priority. She asked the most important one first. The scar, she said. You said there was something in it. Something Osiris contained. A fragment of Voldemort's soul, Harry said. He was afraid of death. Terrified of it. So he split his soul, multiple times, we think, and anchored the pieces to objects to make himself harder to kill. One of those pieces ended up in me the night his killing curse rebounded. My mother's sacrifice reflected the curse back at him, but it shattered one of the anchors and the fragment latched onto the nearest living magical vessel. Hermione was very still. A fragment of his soul. In you. Since you were 1 year old. Until I was 4. Osiris removed it. And the other fragments? That, Harry said, is the larger question. But it's not tonight's question. Tonight's question is Quirrell and the stone and what exactly is between the trapdoor and the end of that corridor. Hermione pulled her notebook out. She carried it everywhere with a dedication that had moved beyond habit into something like a physical extension of her thinking. I've identified 6 protection layers based on what I've read about how Flamel typically secures his work, plus contextual clues from what I know about who's teaching here. There's probably a McGonagall layer, transfiguration logic. A Flitwick enchantment. Possibly something from Sprout. And at the end, she paused. The mirror of Erist, Harry said. How do you know that? Because Dumbledore would want the final protection to be philosophical rather than physical. He'd want it to defeat desire rather than ability. It's elegant. And it's very him. He looked at the coals. The mirror shows you your deepest desire. If your deepest desire is to use the stone, you see yourself using it. If your deepest desire is simply to have it, you see yourself holding it. But if your deepest desire is to find it, not use it, not keep it, the mirror gives it to you. That's brilliant, Hermione said quietly. It is, Harry agreed. The problem is that Quirrell knows it's there. He's been trying to work out how to get around it for months. And I think he stopped. What? Ron said. I think he's been getting help, Harry said. From something that knows how the mirror works. Something that's been in Dumbledore's world for a long time and has watched how he thinks. Ron frowned. Who? Voldemort, Harry said, straightforwardly. He's not gone. He was weakened, not killed. He's been surviving somehow, staying close to things with magical energy. I think he's been with Quirrell for a while. In him, possibly. That's what I need to confirm. The fire cracked. Outside the windows the first snow of November had resumed, soft and indifferent to everything happening inside. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Then they both looked at Harry with the matched expression of two people who had reached the same conclusion separately and simultaneously, that what Harry had just described as a theory to be confirmed was, for most people, something that would require significant time to accept as even possible. You need to get close enough to Quirrell to know for certain, Hermione said. Yes. How close? Close enough to feel the shape of what he's carrying. That's, she stopped herself from saying dangerous. Harry watched the word almost appear and then not appear, watched her decide that dangerous applied to most things differently when applied to Harry than to someone else, which was a correct assessment that he appreciated her making. When? She said instead. Soon, he said. Before the Christmas holidays. If he's going to move on the stone, he'll do it when the school is emptiest. He said this with the calm of someone reporting a weather pattern, and Ron nodded, and Hermione wrote something in her notebook, and the fire breathed its last red breath, and the plan settled over the three of them like armor. He chose a Tuesday. Quirrell had a free period on Tuesday afternoons, which he spent in his office, ostensibly preparing lessons, practically sitting very still in a way that had nothing to do with lesson preparation. Harry knew this because he had been tracking the man's movements for 2 weeks with the peripheral awareness that Isis had taught him to maintain, the kind of background monitoring that didn't require active attention but was always running, the way you always know where the exits are in an unfamiliar room. He knocked on the office door. "See, come in," Quirrell said. And there it was, the stutter, deployed reflexively even when the person calling it up was in a state that had nothing to do with nervousness. A performance so ingrained it had become involuntary. Harry came in. The office was dim, which was a choice rather than necessity, the curtains drawn against afternoon light, candles burning even though it was 2 in the afternoon, the room smelling of incense and something under the incense that Harry identified immediately and said nothing about. He stood in the middle of the floor and looked at Quirrell sitting behind his desk, and Quirrell looked back, the stutter and the nervous hands both deployed, the performance very polished. It was a very good performance. But Harry was in the same room as it now, and in the same room, close enough to reach if he'd extended his hand, the shape of what Quirrell was carrying was unmistakable. It pressed against the air like an object in a bag pressing against fabric, the specific mass of something that had no body and desperately wanted one, something old and damaged and furious, something that was aware of Harry the moment Harry was aware of it. Like recognizing like. The fragment in the scar had been aware of him too, once. Had recognized the Duat in him, had recognized Osiris's proximity, had pressed itself small and afraid in the way of things that know they are being weighed and judged and found wanting. This was different, this fragment was larger, was older, was less damaged in degree though damaged in kind, and its recognition of Harry was not fear but something more complex. Something that had been waiting. "Professor," Harry said, pleasantly and conversationally, sitting down in the student chair across from Quirrell's desk without being invited, "I wanted to ask about the practical exam next week. The shield charm implementation, are we expected to hold it under active pressure or just demonstrate the initial casting?" Quirrell blinked. This was not what he'd expected. Whatever his intelligence about Harry Potter had told him, and Harry suspected the intelligence was considerable, it had probably not included the possibility that the confrontation would arrive dressed as a query about exam technique. The initial casting is sufficient," Quirrell said. "Though sustained application is, of course, the mark of genuine mastery, right, so maintain pressure for full marks," Harry said, making a note. Then, without changing tone or pace, "How long has he been with you?" The air in the room changed. Quirrell's hands went still. Not the ordinary stillness of someone composing a response, the absolute stillness of someone whose performance has just been punctured in a place they didn't know was exposed. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, went somewhere else, and in that fraction of a second Harry saw what was behind them, what had been behind them for a long time, and felt the full weight of it. Then Quirrell smiled. Not his usual nervous not quite smile. A different one. Narrower. Less performance, more person, and the person was not the one who taught defense against the dark arts with a stutter. "Longer than you might think," Quirrell said. The stutter was gone. Just like that, a coat being shrugged off. "Since Albania." 2 years. "He found you," Harry said. It was not a question. "Or I found him." The smile adjusted. "Depending on perspective." Harry looked at him. Not at the performance now, at the man, at Quirinus Quirrell, who had gone to Albania a decent wizard and come back something that had given up a significant portion of its own autonomy for power that belonged to someone else, and who was, Harry thought, still in there, somewhere under the occupation, making choices that had seemed like survival and kept compounding. "Why?" Harry asked. Quirrell tilted his head. "Why what? Why him specifically?" There are other avenues for power. Why him? Something moved across Quirrell's face. Something he didn't fully control, which suggested it was real. Because he knew things, he said quietly. Things that aren't in books. Things about what's possible. About the boundary between life and death. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, he lied to you about that. Quirrell's expression shifted. Whatever he told you about that boundary, Harry said, whatever he promised you was on the other side of it, he lied. I know what's on the other side of that boundary. I've been there. I've sat in the hall where souls are weighed, and the things Voldemort has done to avoid it. He stopped. Not because he was struggling for words but because he was choosing them carefully, because what came next was something he wanted to land correctly. They didn't protect him. They just made what he is worse. The room was very quiet. Harry felt the other presence in the room, the one behind Quirrell's eyes, stir. It was not passive. It pressed forward, pushing through Quirrell's face, and what looked out at Harry for a moment was not Quirrell at all. It was something older and colder and far more focused, something that had spent years in the dark learning to be patient. You're interesting, boy, said a voice that was not Quirrell's. Low, resonant, speaking through borrowed vocal cords with the care of something that knew it was borrowing. You smell of death. Of the old places. I wondered about you. Even before, a pause. Even before the night you destroyed me. I didn't destroy you, Harry said. My mother did. I was 1 year old. And yet here you are. Smelling of eternity. The presence studied him through Quirrell's eyes with an intensity that would have been threatening if Harry were equipped to be threatened by it. Who raised you? The people who found me, Harry said simply. The gods. Not surprise in the voice, recognition. The specific recognition of a man who had spent decades studying the darkest and deepest magic available to him, who had read things most wizards didn't know existed. You were taken to the Duat. Yes. And taught. A pause. By Isis. The mother of magic herself. Another pause, longer. I am suddenly less surprised by how little you seem to fear me. I don't fear you, Harry said. But I want you to understand that I don't say that as a provocation. I say it as information. Something that might have been a laugh moved through the voice. Information. You've built your entire strategy around the fear of death, Harry said, and he kept his voice even, kept it free of the pity he was genuinely feeling, because he didn't think this moment was served by pity. Every step you've taken since you were a teenage boy in an orphanage, every Horcrux, every terrible thing, everything you've survived and everything you've destroyed to survive, it's all the same move. Running from the same door. He looked at Quirrell's face, at the thing looking through it. I've stood in front of that door. It's not what you think it is. A silence that had weight to it. Genuine weight, the kind that came from something old enough to remember being afraid before it forgot how to be anything else. You can't convince me, Voldemort said. I'm not trying to, Harry said honestly. I'm just telling you. Because you deserve to know, at least once, from someone who actually knows. He stood up. He picked up his bag. The stone is going to stay where it is. Whatever Quirrell tries, it won't work. And I'd like you to have thought about what I've said before that happens. He was at the door when the voice came again. You should be afraid, boy. Harry looked back, hand on the door frame. Should I? He left the office. In the corridor, the afternoon light fell through a high window in a long golden bar, and he walked through it without slowing, and the portrait of a 15th-century wizard on the wall opposite watched him go past with an expression that was either suspicion or awe and couldn't quite decide. He told Hermione and Ron that evening. Ron was quiet in the way that meant he was working through something large. Voldemort just talked to you, he said. Directly. Yes. And you told him his life strategy was wrong. I told him he'd been lied to about what he was running from. Right. Ron rubbed the back of his neck. Did you think he might just kill me? Harry said. He's attached to Quirrell's body. He can't do much in that state without revealing himself completely. And he was curious. He wanted to talk. Voldemort is curious, that's one of the things he actually is. Hermione had been quiet all through this, which meant she was either devastated or thinking very hard. It turned out to be the second one. He knows about you now. Specifically. What you are, where you were raised, what you know. Whatever strategy he was using before this conversation, he'll modify it. Yes. So he'll move sooner. Probably. Christmas. Almost certainly. She looked at her notebook and then at him. Harry. Can I ask you something personal? Yes. She looked up. When you talked to him. When you told him he'd been lied to about death, were you hoping it would change something? He thought about it. Really thought about it, which was the only way he answered questions that deserved the treatment. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe. Partly. Osiris talks about souls a certain way, he says every soul is what it chose, and Tom Riddle chose badly from the beginning, but he chose from fear, and fear that starts early enough is a kind of damage. He paused. I'm not forgiving him anything. What he's done, the Horcruxes, the people he killed, that's permanent damage in the world. He stopped. You wanted him to know, Hermione said quietly. Before whatever happens next. Yes, Harry said. I wanted him to know once. Ron looked at him for a long moment, and in that look was something that had been building since the train, a very specific kind of trust, not the automatic trust of someone who follows a person because they're impressive, but the considered trust of someone who has watched a person be honest in every small and large moment and decided that this was the most reliable foundation available. You're the strangest person I've ever met, Ron said, and his voice was warm enough to carry the love in it plainly. That's fair, Harry said. Also absolutely brilliant. That's also fair. Hermione made a sound that was suppressed laughter and wrote something in her notebook with deliberate composure. That night, Harry sat on his bed in the dormitory after the others were asleep and held his thoughts the way Osiris had taught him to hold things, openly, without gripping them. The conversation with Voldemort sat in him differently than he'd expected. Not heavier. More textured. He thought about Tom Riddle. Orphan, brilliant, afraid, reaching for power with both hands because power was the only thing that felt like safety, and then discovering that the safety was temporary, that the body was temporary, that everything was temporary, and deciding that the answer was to break his own soul into pieces and scatter them like a man hiding valuables from a thief he can see coming. He thought about Osiris's hall and the scales and the feather. He thought about his mother, both of them, the one who had given him the scar and the sacrifice and the one who had found him in the dark and taught him Heka and sat beside him in nightmares. Love and death. Creation and ending. Isis and Osiris. The two oldest forces in anything that had ever existed. He reached, without thinking about it, across the distance between worlds, not a full crossing, just the light touch of contact, the way you'd put your hand against a door to feel if it was warm, and felt the Duat on the other side. Felt Osiris, present and steady and vast. Felt Isis, and the particular quality of her attention, which had been a constant in his awareness since he was 4 years old in a cupboard talking to nothing. He knows what I am now, Harry sent across the connection. Not words exactly, the communication in this mode was more like thought shape, impression, feeling with structure. Yes, came back. Isis, clear and warm and very much paying attention. How do you feel? He thought about it. Ready, he sent. A pause. Then Osiris, dry and patient as bedrock, the stone will be moved if you ask. Dumbledore would listen. I know, Harry sent. But that doesn't fix the larger problem. It just relocates it. Another pause. Longer. Then, unmistakably and with the faint quality that was the closest Osiris came to being proud, no. It doesn't. Harry lay back on his bed and looked at the canopy above him and listened to 4 other boys breathing in their sleep. Outside the tower windows, snow was falling again, the same snow that had been falling all month, patient and indifferent and clean. He thought about Quirrell's face when the stutter dropped away. He thought about the voice that had come through it. He thought about the stone 2 floors below him and the mirror at the end of the corridor and Dumbledore's elegant, philosophical, final protection. He thought, before Christmas. Then he closed his eyes, and went to sleep, and did not dream of anything frightening, because he had been taught a long time ago by the Lord of the Dead himself that there was nothing in the dark worth being afraid of. It was only the truth. And Harry had always been fine with the truth. Chapter 4, The Walk. Christmas came to Hogwarts the way it always did, suddenly, as if the castle had been waiting for permission. One morning the staircases smelled of pine and the great hall grew its annual forest of trees, and the student body collectively exhaled the tension of autumn and filled the space with something louder and warmer. Most of the student body left. Harry stayed. He had discussed it with Isis in October, not the stone specifically, but the general principle of remaining at Hogwarts over Christmas, and she had listened and said nothing that was disapproval and nothing that was unqualified encouragement, which was her way of telling him she trusted his reasoning and wanted him to be sure of it himself. Osiris had said even less, which meant the same thing in higher volume. Ron stayed too, because his parents were doing something involving the Romanian Dragon Reserve and Charlie, and because Ron's instinct for the moment when a friend needed company had been calibrated by a lifetime of siblings and was consequently excellent. Hermione went home to her parents in London but left 3 inches of annotated notes on the protection layers, a book on mirror enchantments flagged in 6 places, and a note that said, "Don't do anything without telling me first, even if telling me first is impossible, write it down and tell me after. H.G." Harry had read the note twice and kept it. The castle in Christmas holiday was a different creature. Quieter, larger, the corridors acquiring an echo they didn't have when full. Harry found he liked it, the reduced social density, the way the remaining students moved through spaces with more ease, the teachers more visible and human in the absence of the crowd they maintained authority over. Even Snape, encountered once in the corridor near the dungeons at an hour when both of them were separately surprised to encounter anyone, managed something that wasn't quite a nod but was in the same neighborhood. Harry nodded back. He spent the days reading, there was always more to read, and flying, and talking to Ron, and doing the specific kind of preparation that wasn't preparing for a particular event but simply keeping himself sharp and present. He ran through Hecka workings in the early mornings before Ron was awake, in the cold of the dormitory with his breath visible in the air, holding spells together for duration rather than power, maintenance rather than explosion, the kind of work Isis had drilled into him because anyone could push hard for a moment and the real measure was what you could sustain. Ron, who had walked in on this once and stood in the doorway watching a small precise constellation of lights hold steady in the cold air above Harry's bed, had said "morning" in a perfectly normal tone and gone to get dressed, which Harry appreciated enormously. The knowledge of when Quirrell would move came not as intelligence or investigation but as simple awareness, the same background monitoring he'd been running since the Quidditch match, the same feeling for shape in the magical environment of the castle. It was the 23rd of December, 4 days into the holiday, when he felt the disruption. Late evening, after dinner, the light outside already black for hours. He was in the common room reading with Ron opposite him losing a game of chess against himself, which he did when he needed to think and apparently found useful. Harry closed his book. "Now?" Ron said, without looking up from the board. "Yes." Ron moved a knight, examined the result, and stood up. "Right." He looked around the common room, which was empty. "Am I coming?" Harry looked at him. At the straightforward readiness of him, the total absence of theater about it. Ron Weasley was not brave in the way stories usually packaged bravery, not the dramatic declaration, not the defiant speech. He was brave the way reliable things were brave. You asked, he was there. "No," Harry said. "I need you here." Ron didn't argue. Another man might have pushed, the adventure of it, the story of being present for something significant. Ron just nodded once. "You'll tell me everything after." "Everything," Harry confirmed. "Be careful." "I'll be fine." "I know you'll be fine," Ron said. "I said be careful. They're different things." Harry stopped. Looked at him. Felt something in his chest that was simple and real. "You're right," he said. "I'll be careful." He left the common room. The third-floor corridor was not dark. That was the first thing. The castle generated its own illumination in the way very old magical structures did, a faint sourceless glow that lived in the stone itself, and the corridor on the third floor had this quality amplified, as if the wards and protections layered into the floor and walls were generating enough magical energy to light the space as a side effect. Harry walked through it without a wand drawn, without a torch, hands easy at his sides. The door at the end of the corridor was already open. He stopped outside it for a moment, not from hesitation but from the specific practice of full awareness before entering a new space. He reached, felt the shape of what was ahead, Quirrell's presence, purposeful and moving, already well into the protection layers. Voldemort's presence sharper and more distinct, the thing behind eyes quality more prominent tonight than it had been in the office, as if anticipation or proximity to the goal had made it less careful about concealment. And something else. Something vast and patient and not quite present, the way the Duat was always not quite present in any space Harry occupied, a sense of his parents on the other side of a very thin membrane, of Osiris somewhere in the structure of things, of Isis a constant warm pressure at the edge of his awareness that never entirely left. Not intervening. Present. There was a difference and Harry knew it deeply and was grateful for it. He went through the door. The descent was deliberate and unhurried. A trapdoor, a drop, the dog music problem, which he solved by humming 3 bars of something Thoth had taught him once, an old Kemetic melody, and the enormous 3-headed dog went horizontal before he touched the ground, all 3 heads tucked in the uncomplicated sleep of animals that are simply, finally, comfortable. He stepped over a paw the size of a table and through the next door. Devil's Snare. The plant filled the chamber, thick and reaching, moving with the slow appetite of something that had been waiting for a warm body and had been waiting long enough to be impatient. It reached for Harry immediately, tendrils looping toward his legs, his arms, the particular seeking motion of a plant that had been conditioned to expect struggle and rewarded for it. Harry stood still. He let the tendrils find his arms and wind around them and he directed a very small, very warm thread of Heka through the contact points, not fire, not the violent solution. Something more like the energy of a living thing at rest, the warmth of sunlight that had nothing to do with threat, and the devil's snare paused, confused by the information it was receiving from its prey, which was generating none of the panic chemistry it had been cultivating toward. Harry walked through it slowly and the tendrils released him by increments, uncertain what else to do. He found Quirrell's footprints in the soft earth on the other side. The flying keys chamber was a problem of geometry. Hundreds of winged keys circling under a vaulted ceiling, one correct key for a locked door, broomsticks on the floor for those who needed the chase. Harry looked up, located the correct key in approximately 20 seconds, it was the most battered, the most used, the one with the slightly bent wing that explained the erratic flight pattern making it harder to follow, and did not take a broomstick. He raised his hand, worked a brief simple accio with the Hecarian-forced ease of someone for whom summoning was barely a conscious act, and the key fell into his palm trailing wing beats like a trapped bird, which he felt bad about, and so he took an extra moment to smooth its feathers with a murmur in the old language before using it on the lock and stepping through. The chest chamber stopped him for a moment. Not because it was difficult but because it was impressive, enormous pieces, clearly enchanted with genuine intelligence rather than scripted movement, standing in the careful stillness of a game mid-progress. Quirrell had moved through here. The pieces were out of their starting positions, a brutal line of attack that had clearly cost its player pieces but worked, the white side devastated and cleared, the king standing aside. Harry looked at the board for a moment. Ron would have loved this. He would have narrated it, piece by piece, move by move, with the enthusiasm of someone watching a sport he understood better than the players. Harry filed it away to describe precisely. He moved through the board without playing, skirted the edge, where the pieces watched him with the alert wariness of non-combatants near an active engagement, and stepped over the boundary line on the far side without triggering the game's conditions, which required a player rather than a bypasser. The enchantment registered him as passing through, not engaging, and let him through. A troll, unconscious. Quirrell had managed this one himself, clearly, a heap of unconscious troll with the specific quality of something hit hard and fast. Harry stepped around it, noted the method used from the impact point with professional interest, and moved on. The potions chamber was elegant. 7 bottles, a riddle in verse on the scroll, the same fire and black flame obstacle that required the logical solution rather than the magical one. Harry read the riddle once. It was, he noted, exactly as clever as someone who was primarily a poet would write and exactly as constrained as someone who needed to use 7 specific bottles would produce. The answer was the smallest bottle, and you had to trust the logic, and most people who got this far probably found the trust difficult. He picked up the smallest bottle. He didn't drink it. He held it, felt its properties through the glass. It was genuine, the potion did what the riddle promised, but Harry didn't need to shrink to pass through black fire. He stepped through it with a working that translated the fire's intent rather than its heat, a technique Isis had taught him for dealing with wards that operated on conditional logic, and came through the other side cool and intact. The bottle he set down carefully on the correct side of the flame, in case someone needed it later. The mirror room was large and quiet. Quirrell stood in front of the mirror of Earist with his back to the door, which was a tactical choice Harry noted and set aside, because it didn't affect anything meaningful. The mirror stood at the far end of the room, tall, ornate, with the specific quality of very old enchanted objects that have been worked and reworked by a powerful hand until the magic is so deeply integrated that the object and the spell are inseparable. The inscription along its top caught the candlelight, Eris stra Aaru oit ube kafru oit onwosi. Harry read it correctly, had read it in Hermione's notes, had understood Dumbledore's wordplay immediately, and looked at the mirror surface and saw, for the fraction of a second before he redirected his gaze, what it showed him. Isis. Osiris. The house in Aaru. Ron. Hermione. Neville's face, surprised and happy. A table full of people talking. His mother Lily, present and alive. His father James beside her, laughing at something. He looked away. Not because it hurt, though it contained something that was in the neighborhood of hurt, the specific ache of seeing what could have been and measuring it against what was, which was one of the oldest human pains and one Harry had not been immune to just because he'd been raised between worlds. He looked away because the mirror was not for him tonight. He had not come here to be shown anything. Quirrell was muttering at the mirror. Not casting, the mirror wasn't that kind of enchanted object, you couldn't cast at it, but speaking to Voldemort, relaying what he saw in the glass, and what he saw in the glass was himself holding the stone, which meant his deepest desire was to use it, which meant Dumbledore's protection was working exactly as intended. He's in the mirror, Voldemort said, through Quirrell's mouth. Harry walked further into the room. His footstep was quiet but not inaudible, and Quirrell turned. The stutter was absent entirely now, had been, Harry suspected, since the office conversation, some pretense having been retired between them as unnecessary. Quirrell's face was the face of someone who had made all their important decisions already and was now simply in the execution phase. There was a specific exhaustion in it that wasn't physical. Potter, Quirrell said. Professor, Harry said. He looked at the mirror. Looked at Quirrell. He's right, you know. The stone is in there. But you can't get it out that way. I know that, said the voice that wasn't Quirrell's. How? Quirrell said, and the question was genuinely collaborative, the two of them a single inquiry directed at Harry, which was one of the more unsettling relational dynamics Harry had observed in his 11 years. The old man's protection requires, that you want to find it rather than use it, Harry said. Yes. I know. He looked at Quirrell directly. Stand aside. A pause. "Stand aside," Voldemort said, slow and precise through Quirrell's lips. "The child wants the stone." "I'm not going to use it," Harry said patiently. "I'm going to take it and give it to Flammel, and then I'm going to have a conversation with Dumbledore about his security arrangements, and then this part of the problem is finished." He looked at the mirror. "I'll need about 15 seconds. The stone," Voldemort said, "is the most significant magical artifact in existence. You're 11 years old." "I'm aware of how old I am," Harry said. He looked at the voice behind Quirrell's eyes and felt the quality of its attention, still that intense focused intelligence, still the curiosity, still the thing that had said you're interesting in the office with the specific surprise of something that had genuinely not expected to be interested. "You could stop me," Harry said, acknowledging it honestly. "You have options. You're limited by Quirrell's body and by the fact that this room is comprehensively warded and you've been here long enough that the castle knows you're here, which means Dumbledore knows something is happening even if he doesn't know exactly what. But you have options." "Yes," Voldemort said. "You're going to let me take the stone," Harry said. "Not because you can't fight me. Because you already know this attempt is over and the next one needs different preparation, and you need to be intact for the next one, and whatever Quirrell has left to give isn't enough for tonight." "Quiet. You're very calm," Voldemort said. "Yes. Most people who stand in front of me are not calm." "I know. You still don't fear me." "No," Harry said. And then, because it was true and because he had decided honesty was the only currency worth spending, "But I don't dismiss you either. You're the most intelligent dark wizard in several centuries. What you've built, the Horcruxes, the network, the ideology, it's all wrong, all of it, the goal and the method both. But it's not stupid. You're not stupid. That makes you more dangerous than if you were, and I won't pretend otherwise." Something moved in Quirrell's face that was not entirely Voldemort. Something was Quirrell. Harry looked at him, at the man inside the possession, at Quirinus Quirrell who had gone to Albania looking for something and found the wrong thing and stayed anyway, making the same bad choice in compounding layers, and said, just to him, just to whatever was still operating independently behind the eyes, "You don't have to do this." Quirrell looked at him. Really looked at him, not the host of Voldemort look but the Quirrell look, and in it was something that had been buried for 2 years under ambition and desperation and the slow erosion of sharing your mind with something that had survived by consuming everything around it. Not hope exactly. But the memory of hope. The shape where it used to be. "I don't know how to stop," Quirrell said, and it was his voice, his actual voice without the stutter or the performance. "I know," Harry said quietly. "I know you don't." Then he stepped forward, and Quirrell reached for him, not out of violence, or perhaps not only out of violence, but because Voldemort was Voldemort and had its own imperatives regardless of what Quirrell wanted, and Harry's hand caught Quirrell's wrist. The effect was immediate and total. When Osiris had removed the soul fragment from Harry's scar 7 years ago, he had sealed it in a vessel of compressed eternity and the fragment had recognized what was happening and understood exactly what it meant. The fragment in Quirrell recognized the same thing, recognized the Duat on Harry's skin, recognized the touch of something that had been in the presence of the Lord of the Dead since the age of 4, recognized the specific quality of a mortal life that had been so thoroughly shaped by death's understanding that it had become, itself, a kind of threshold. The shriek was not audible. It was felt, in the walls, in the mirror, in the stones of the castle itself, a high terrible vibration that was not sound but meaning, the specific frequency of something ancient being unhoused. Quirrell crumpled. Harry caught him. Held him up. The man weighed almost nothing, which said something specific and awful about what 2 years of Voldemort's residence had cost him in material terms. "He's gone," Harry said quietly. "From this room. He's not gone from the world, you know that." Quirrell looked at him from behind eyes that were, for the first time in 2 years, entirely his own. "The stone," he managed. "Don't worry about the stone," Harry said. He set Quirrell down carefully against the wall, stood up, and walked to the mirror. His reflection looked back at him, not the stone vision, not the extended family image he'd caught before. Just Harry. He looked at himself in the mirror of desire and found his deepest desire looking back at him, and what the mirror showed him was this: Harry, standing exactly where he was standing now, doing exactly what he was doing now, having chosen to be here because he chose it. That was it. The deepest desire of a boy raised by gods was to be exactly himself, exactly here, exactly choosing. He felt the stone before he saw it, a warmth in his right pocket, a weight where no weight had been, the mirror delivering what Dumbledore had built it to deliver to someone who wanted to find rather than use. He put his hand in his pocket. The stone was warm against his palm, dense and real, the most significant magical artifact in existence, which sat in his 11-year-old hand like a very important river pebble. He put it back in his pocket. He went to Quirrell. Dumbledore arrived 11 minutes later. Harry knew it was 11 minutes because he had been sitting on the floor next to Quirrell, who was unconscious but breathing in the steady way of someone whose body was beginning to remember how to operate without an occupant, and he had counted. Not from anxiety, counting was just something his mind did when his body was still. He catalogued, in those 11 minutes, everything that had happened in the room and its sequence, filed it with the completeness that Thoth had trained into him, the specific habit of the record keeper: everything matters, nothing is too small, write it in the correct order. Dumbledore came through the door with his wand out and stopped. He saw Quirrell on the floor. He saw Harry sitting beside him. He saw the room otherwise undamaged, the mirror intact, the candles still burning, the chess game logic of the whole situation complete and resolved without the battle he had clearly been bracing for. He looked at Harry for a long moment. "Quirrell will need Madame Pomfrey," Harry said. "He's stable, but 2 years of Voldemort's occupation has done significant damage to his nervous system. He needs rest and probably some specialist care. I don't think he'll be teaching again." Dumbledore lowered his wand slowly. "Voldemort is not in this room," Harry continued. "He left through Quirrell when I made contact. He's not destroyed, I want to be very clear about that. He's unhoused again, which puts us back to where we were after 1981, minus the Quirrell arrangement. He'll find another host or another method." "The stone," Dumbledore said. His voice was very measured, the tone of an extraordinarily controlled man keeping his control despite having arrived at a scene that had not fit any of his anticipated versions. Harry took the stone from his pocket and held it out. Dumbledore looked at it in his palm. He looked at Harry. Then he crossed the room and took it, and something moved in his face that was complex and old and not, Harry thought, entirely comfortable. The expression of a man recalculating something important. "You came alone," Dumbledore said. "Yes. You came through 6 separate protection layers. 7 if you count the corridor door." "Yes." "Without," Dumbledore paused. "You don't have a wand out." Harry looked at his hands, which were indeed empty. "I didn't need it." "The devil's snare." "Hecka." "Warmth application, calm the plant rather than burn it." "Less damaging." "The keys." "Accio." "The chess." "Walked around it." Dumbledore was quiet. "The fire." "Conditional word translation," Harry said. "You pass through the intent rather than the obstacle. It's a pre-classical technique. I learned it from," he stopped. "I learned it from someone who's been doing it for several thousand years." The silence that followed was a specific kind, not empty, not uncomfortable exactly, but full of something shifting, some weight redistributing, the sound of a very long-held assumption gently fracturing. Dumbledore sat down in the only chair in the room, which happened to be the chair beside the mirror, and he looked at Harry Potter standing in the middle of the room with his hands in his pockets and his glasses slightly askew and the calm that had been there since he was 4 years old in a cupboard, which was a different kind of calm now but had the same root. "I put you in a cupboard," Dumbledore said. "Not as a justification. Not with defense prepared. Just the fact, stated plainly, which Harry found more respectful than an argument would have been." "Yes," Harry said. "I believe the blood wards, they worked, Harry said. For what they were designed for. Voldemort couldn't reach me through the connection to my aunt. That part was correctly calculated. But the rest was a child in a cupboard, Harry said. Without anger. Anger would have been easier, in some ways, but he had Isis's honesty in him and Osiris's patience, and the plain statement of a fact was always more accurate than the heat of it. You didn't know anyone else was going to find me. I understand that. Your plan was built on what you knew, and you knew a lot, but you couldn't know everything. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. No, he said quietly. I could not. Isis found me the same night you left me, Harry said. Through a seam the magic of my mother's sacrifice opened. She and Osiris took me to the Duat. He watched Dumbledore's face, at the controlled response, at the genuine intelligence processing this information without the luxury of disbelief, because Albus Dumbledore was too well-read to disbelieve in Egyptian gods. They raised me. They taught me. They kept me alive and whole in every way that counts. He paused. I don't want you to feel guilt, particularly. What I want you to understand is that I am not who you planned for. I'm not the weapon or the sacrifice or the chosen vessel. I'm just me. And I'm going to deal with what's left of Voldemort on my own terms. That, Dumbledore said, very slowly, is exactly what I was afraid you'd say. I know, Harry said. I think you were afraid of it because you have a plan, and the plan requires a specific kind of Harry Potter, and I'm a different one. Dumbledore was quiet. I don't want to fight you about it, Harry said. I genuinely don't. You've protected this school and these students for decades and you've done it carefully and at significant personal cost, and I respect that entirely. But the plan, the one that ends with me dying to destroy the Horcrux in my scar, Dumbledore went very still. The scar is clean, Harry said. Has been since I was 4. Osiris removed the fragment then. So that particular sequence doesn't apply to me, which means the plan needs to be restructured from the foundation. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I'd like to help with that. If you'll let me. Another silence. Very long this time. The mirror behind Dumbledore showed him something that Harry didn't try to read, because whatever Albus Dumbledore most deeply desired was his own business. How old are you? Dumbledore said finally, and it was not the question of a man checking facts. It was the question of a man staring at something that didn't fit his categories and looking for a handhold. 11, Harry said. And whatever 7 years in the Duat makes me. Older than 11. In some ways, Harry agreed. Dumbledore folded his hands in his lap. He looked at the stone he was still holding. He looked at it for a long time, at the thing he had built 6 layers of protection around, that had been retrieved by a boy with his hands in his pockets, and then he said, I will send this to Nicholas with an explanation in the morning. He and I have already discussed the possibility of destruction. Good, Harry said. That's the right call. I have many questions. I know. Starting with, not tonight, Harry said, not unkindly. Tonight Quirrell needs the hospital wing and you need to write to Flammel, and I need to go tell Ron what happened because I promised him everything. He picked up his bag from where he'd set it by the door. I'll come to your office Thursday. We can talk for as long as you need. Dumbledore looked at him one more time. At the boy who had walked through 7 protection layers with his hands in his pockets and sat on the floor next to an unconscious possessed man for 11 minutes counting. Who had given back the Philosopher's Stone without being asked and then redirected the conversation with the gentle precision of someone who had been having strategic discussions since before Hogwarts was a consideration. Thursday, Dumbledore said. Thursday, Harry confirmed. He paused at the door. The mirror, I'll move it, Dumbledore said quietly. In the morning. Harry nodded and left the room. His footsteps were quiet in the corridor, steady and unhurried, and behind him the mirror showed Dumbledore something that no one else in the school would ever know, and the castle breathed around them both, ancient and attentive and deeply, deeply interested in what came next. Ron was in the common room when Harry got back. He had not gone to bed, had clearly not considered it, sitting in the chair by the fire with the chess board set up in front of him and an untouched cup of tea gone cold beside it. He looked up when Harry came in. Harry sat down across from him and said, "The stone is with Dumbledore. Quirrell is in the hospital wing. Voldemort is unhoused again. Dumbledore knows about the Duat." Ron looked at the cold tea. Then at Harry. "How was the devil's snare?" Confused, Harry said. "The flying keys?" "Fine. The chess?" Ron's eyes lit slightly on this one. "McGonagall's work. Very good. I went around it. I'll describe the board position to you tomorrow, you'll love it." Ron relaxed into his chair with the expression of someone whose vigil has concluded well. "Were you scared at all?" Harry thought about it, honestly. "No," he said. "But I was sad, for a bit." "About Quirrell?" "Because he was possessed." "Because he chose to be," Harry said. "Not entirely, not cleanly. It started with ambition and then it became something he didn't know how to undo. 2 years of that." He shook his head. He looked like himself at the end. Just for a moment. Ron was quiet. He moved a pawn on the chess board for no reason, just having something to do with his hands. "Will he be okay?" "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "Physically, maybe. The rest of it," he paused. "I hope so." "And Voldemort? Still out there. Still a problem. But not an immediate one." "Right." Ron nodded. Picked up the cold tea, looked at it, put it down again. "Dumbledore knows about you now. He knows more than he did." "Not everything." "Was he," Ron searched for the word, "weird about it?" "He was very controlled about it," Harry said. "Which is what he always is." But underneath the control, he thought about the expression on Dumbledore's face. The quality of the silence after "I am not who you planned for." I think he's doing genuine rethinking. That's a start. Ron looked at the fire for a moment. "You said you're going to deal with Voldemort on your own terms." "Yes." "What does that mean, exactly?" Harry was quiet, because it was a real question and deserved a real answer. "It means I'm going to destroy what's left of him, the Horcruxes, all of them, and I'm going to do it because it's the right thing and because it needs doing, not because I was chosen or because someone else's plan requires it. And at the end, whatever's left of his soul," he paused. "Osiris will judge it. Properly. The way it should have been judged a long time ago." Ron absorbed this. "Then, can I help?" "You already are," Harry said. "No, I mean," Ron met his eyes, direct and simple. "With all of it. The Horcruxes. Whatever comes next. I mean actually help. Not just sit in the common room counting minutes." Harry looked at him. At the honesty of the offer, at the complete absence of self-consciousness about it, at the person who had been his friend since the first hour on a train and had never once asked Harry to be smaller or more manageable or less of what he was. "Yes," Harry said. "When the time comes." "Yes." Ron nodded once, satisfied. "Good." He stood up and stretched. "I'm going to bed. You should sleep." "In a minute," Harry said. Ron went upstairs. Harry sat in the chair by the fire, in the quiet Gryffindor common room with its banners and its warmth and its smell of old wood and parchment, and he felt the Duat at the edge of things, Isis, attentive and present. Osiris, steady as stone. And further back, very far, the faint warm impossible sense of Lily Potter, who had loved so precisely and so completely that the love had cracked the world open, and whose son sat by a fire in the school she had attended and felt her there, not as grief but as foundation. He stayed until the fire was low. Then he went to bed, and the castle settled around him, and the night was quiet, and the stone was on its way back to the man who had made it, and there was still so much ahead. But tonight was finished, and tonight had been enough. Chapter 5, The Boy in the Page's Summer came and went the way summers did when you had somewhere better to be. Harry spent most of it in the Duat, which after the contained drama of the school year felt like stepping out of a loud room into open air. The Duat had its own rhythms and none of them were urgent in the mortal sense. Things in the realm of the dead moved at the pace of eternity, which was either very slow or no pace at all depending on how you measured it, and Harry found the recalibration useful. He ran Heka workings with Isis in the mornings. He sat with Osiris in the long not quite afternoons and they talked about the Horcruxes, not strategy exactly, more the nature of the things themselves, what a soul anchor was in structural terms, what it meant to scatter yourself like that. It's fear architecture, Osiris said once, during one of these conversations. He was doing the thing he did when thinking, turning his crook end over end in one hand, very slowly, a contemplative habit so old it had worn grooves in the wood. Every Horcrux is a wall built against the same door. He builds another one because the last one didn't make the door go away. How many do you think there are? Harry asked. Osiris considered this with the patience of someone who had all the time that had ever existed. 7 was his intention. 6 objects, 1 self. He told himself 7 was a meaningful number. A pause. He was right that 7 is meaningful. Wrong about why. He'd already made 5 by the time he came for me and my parents. 4, we believe. The diary was 5th. Osiris looked at the fragment vessel on the shelf behind him, the piece of Voldemort's soul that had lived in Harry's scar, sealed in compressed eternity since Harry was 4 years old. This was meant to be the 6th. Unintentional. The killing curse rebounding shattered one of the anchors he'd already made and the fragment latched to you reflexively. Harry looked at the vessel. He had done this occasionally over the years, looked at it the way you might look at a scar, with the specific examining attention of someone establishing that a healed thing was still healed. He lost count of himself, he said. He did. He made more than he intended and understood less of each one because the soul, divided, becomes less capable of accurate self-knowledge. Osiris set the crook down. Which is one of several reasons the whole endeavor was catastrophically misguided from a structural standpoint. Can I ask you something? Always. When it's over, all of them, the full accounting, what does the judgment look like? For a soul that fractured itself that many times. Osiris was quiet for long enough that the silence became a kind of answer in itself. It's never been done, he said finally. Not in this form. Which makes it interesting. He looked at Harry steadily. It also makes it yours to navigate. When you bring the pieces to me, I'll need your account of each one. You'll have been there. You'll know the context. Harry held this for a moment. The weight of it was real but not crushing, more like knowing a long walk was ahead and being glad you had good boots. All right, he said. He went back to Hogwarts in September carrying this and carrying other things, a year's growth in Heka precision that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at, a deeper understanding of what the Horcruxes were and therefore how to approach them, and the specific readiness of someone who had spent a summer doing exactly the preparation that was needed. Ron wrote him 12 letters over the summer. Hermione wrote 8, each one longer than the last, the final one containing 3 pages on a theory she developed about magical inheritance and ancient bloodlines that was mostly correct and had 2 assumptions Harry could refine from direct experience. He wrote back to both of them with the regularity of someone who understood that letters were not just communication but a form of presence, a way of staying in a place while you were somewhere else. He was genuinely looking forward to going back. The Hogwarts Express on the 1st of September had the same organized chaos as the year before, but Harry moved through it differently, not with more confidence exactly, because confidence had never been the variable, but with the ease of someone returning to familiar territory and finding it exactly as remembered and therefore comfortable. Ron was already in their compartment. He'd saved seats with his bag and his rat and the chess set he'd brought for the journey despite the fact that Scabbers was apparently the only available opponent and Scabbers showed no interest in chess. He looked up when Harry came in and said, "Heard from Hermione this morning, she's in carriage 3, coming up when she's finished with, he checked, a discussion with someone from Ravenclaw about something she described as a crucial oversight in Bathilda Bagshot's methodology, which sounds like Hermione 4, I found an error and I'm very happy about it. Sounds right, Harry said, stowing his trunk and dropping into the seat across from Ron. Mott settled on his shoulder and immediately fixed Scabbers with the predatory focus that she maintained toward all small animals as a matter of principle but rarely acted on, having apparently determined that acting on it would generate more trouble than the satisfaction was worth. Good summer? Ron asked. Good summer. Yours? Fred and George blew up the garden shed. Percy got his OWL results and acted like he'd won a war. Mum cried about Bill coming home from Egypt. Dad got obsessed with rubber ducks. Ron delivered this in the flat, fond cadence of someone reporting the unchanging weather of a place they loved. Normal. Harry smiled. He had always found the Weasley family's specific brand of cheerful mayhem deeply appealing, not enviously, not with the sharp edge of comparison, just genuinely, the way you appreciate a good fire when you walk in from the cold. I think something's different about this year, Harry said, after a moment. Ron looked up from attempting to interest Scabbers in a pawn. Different how? Can't tell yet. But something's moving. Ron considered this. He had learned, over the previous year, that when Harry said something's moving it was the specific language of his particular kind of awareness, not vague intuition but felt information, the kind that came from a sensory register Ron didn't have and had long since stopped trying to fully understand. He just calibrated his response accordingly. Good different or bad different? Interesting different, Harry said. Which usually contains both. Hermione arrived 20 minutes into the journey with her hair wind disordered and her eyes bright with the specific energy she had when she'd been right about something recently. She confirmed the Bathilda Bagshot assessment without being asked, 3 independent factual errors in Chapter 6 alone, I've written to the publisher, settled into her seat, looked at Harry, and said without preamble, I've been thinking about the diary. Riddle's diary, Harry said. You told me last year you believed there were multiple soul anchors. Objects he's hidden himself in. The diary is one. What do you know about it specifically? Not where it is, Harry said. I know it existed. I know it was made early, when he was still at school, probably. It would be different from the later ones because he was different when he made it. Less careful. More, present. More of himself in it. Present how? Hermione pressed. The later Horcruxes are storage, Harry said, thinking it through as he spoke, not explaining so much as working, which was what conversations with Hermione usually turned into. He made them to survive. The diary was made by someone who also wanted to be remembered. To still be able to act in the world. It's not just a storage vessel, it's a projection. A piece of Tom Riddle that can still think and speak and pursue its own aims. Hermione went very still in the specific way she went still when something large clicked into place. It writes back, she said. Doesn't it? If you write to it. Almost certainly. So it's an interactive piece of him. Capable of manipulation. Grooming, even. She looked at Harry with an expression that was serious and a little cold. If someone found it and started using it without knowing what it was, very dangerous, Harry agreed. Where is it? That, Harry said, is the question I've been trying to answer since May. The train moved through the countryside, green and gold in early September, and the three of them sat in the comfortable architecture of a working conversation, Hermione's notes appearing, Ron making the occasional lateral suggestion that was frequently wrong and occasionally brilliantly right, Harry threading what he knew through what they were building together. Mott watched proceedings from Harry's shoulder with the expression of someone who found mortal collaborative thinking endearing if inefficient. The answer arrived at Hogwarts before they did, which they didn't know yet. What Harry felt first, stepping off the carriages, was the difference in the school's magical atmosphere, a subtle thing, a texture that hadn't been there in first year. Not wrong exactly. More like a note added to a chord that changed the chord's character. He filed it and moved on and went to the feast, which was the same feast it always was except that the new defense teacher was somebody different, and Harry looked at him across the hall and noted the quality of his presence, polished, pleasant, performing warmth the way some people performed confidence, with the practiced ease of long habit. Gilderoy Lockhart had the specific quality of someone who had built an identity like a house of cards and had been maintaining it with increasing effort for long enough that the effort had become invisible to him. "He wrote all those books," Hermione said, looking at Lockhart with the expression she usually reserved for impressive scholarship, which told Harry she hadn't read them critically yet. "He wrote all those books," Harry agreed, neutrally. She caught the tone. "What?" "I'll tell you what I think after you've read one properly," he said. "I don't want to bias you." She looked at him sideways, then at Lockhart, then back at her plate with the expression of someone who had just decided to read something critically who hadn't quite gotten there yet. It took her until the end of September. She came to Harry in the library, where he was, as usual, with her copy of Magical Me open to a chapter she'd annotated extensively in red ink rather than her usual blue, which said something about the nature of the annotations. She sat down, pushed the book across, and said nothing. Harry looked at the red margin notes. They were meticulous and devastating, cross-referenced factual errors, inconsistencies between accounts, 3 separate instances where Lockhart described performing magic that was structurally impossible under his own stated conditions, 6 places where the monster in question had been reported handled differently by other sources Hermione had traced. "He didn't do any of it," she said. "Did he?" "I don't think so," Harry said. "I think he finds people who did do impressive things and takes their stories. Memory charms on the witnesses. Publishes the account as his own." Hermione looked at the book. Then she closed it carefully, with the specific careful closure of someone managing real anger by doing something precise. "He's teaching defense against the dark arts." "Poorly," Harry said. "He doesn't know anything." "He knows enough to appear to know things to people who know less than him," Harry said. "Which is not nothing. It's just not sufficient." She looked at him. "What do we do about it?" "Nothing yet," Harry said. "He's not dangerous the way Quirrell was dangerous. He's inadequate. And eventually inadequate people in positions requiring adequacy tend to expose themselves." He paused. "Something bigger is coming anyway." Lockhart is background noise. "The diary," Hermione said. "The diary," Harry confirmed. She looked at him for a moment. "You know it's here, don't you?" "At Hogwarts." "I think so," he said. "I've been feeling for it since we arrived. It's somewhere in the building or someone in the building has it. The presence is intermittent, it's not constantly active. Someone's using it occasionally." Using it. She absorbed this. "Someone's been writing to it." "Yes. And they don't know what it is." "Almost certainly not." Hermione picked up her quill. "Who?" "I don't know yet," Harry said. "But whoever it is, they're being shaped by it. Tom Riddle is very good at shaping people. He's been practicing since he was 11 years old." The answer to that question came in October, and it came ugly. The message was written on the wall near the entrance to the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Below it, hanging stiff-tailed from a torch bracket, was Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, petrified. Harry stood at the back of the crowd that gathered and felt the message's weight, not fear but recognition. The chamber. Salazar Slytherin's private contingency, the thing he'd built into the school's foundations when he left, the something that exists to purge the school of those he considered unworthy. A monster inside the walls. He knew about it from Hogwarts, a history, the rumors, the legend. The chamber opened 50 years ago with victims then too. He knew about it from Isis, who had knowledge of Hogwarts that went beyond what the history books contained, absorbed through centuries of attention to places where magical energy concentrated. He knew what lived in the chamber. He had known since September. He felt it in the walls, a vast cold presence, ancient and alien, moving through the castle's plumbing and hidden passages with the patient deliberateness of something that had been asleep for 50 years and was hungry. Not a human presence, not a magical creature in the conventional sense. Something older. Something that killed with sight. Basilisk, he thought. Old Kemetic texts had accounts of them, called differently, described in terms that matched, the king's serpent, the destroyer of sight. He had read them in the Duat when he was 9, in a collection Thoth kept specifically because it contained things that had nowhere else to be. He watched the crowd react to the wall and to Mrs. Norris and to the dark promise of the message, and he thought, Riddle's diary is doing this. The diary found someone. The diary is opening the chamber. He needed to find who. He found Hermione 3 days later in the hospital wing, sitting beside Colin Creevy's petrified form with her notebook and an expression of focused grief, not tears. Hermione's grief tended to go internal and come out as action, but something tight around her eyes that was real. Colin Creevy had been petrified in the corridor between the great hall and the first-floor staircase, his camera raised as if he'd been pointing it at something he'd seen reflected in the lens. He was using the camera as a mirror, Harry said quietly, sitting beside her. I know. She looked at Colin's small, stiff form. The basilisk's direct gaze kills. A reflected image only petrifies. He's lucky he was, she stopped. He's 11. I know. We need to find the entrance to the chamber before someone dies, she said, without looking up. I know that too. Do you know where it is? Getting closer, Harry said. The girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. The one that's been flooded all term, Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. There's something in the plumbing in that section of the castle that doesn't fit the building's structural logic. Something hidden in the architecture. Hermione looked at him. You've been walking the building. Every night for 2 weeks, Harry said. Ron thinks I'm sleep disrupted from something potions related, which I've let him keep thinking because there's nothing specific to report yet, and Ron worries loudly. She almost smiled. Ron should be told. Yes. When there's something to tell him. Harry. She said his name in the specific way she had when she was going to say something important. The person using the diary. Whoever Riddle has, they're not doing it consciously. Or fully consciously. The diary works by trust, by intimacy. They've been talking to it, confiding in it, and it's been answering them and building a hold over them. Yes. It would be someone lonely, she said. Someone who needed, she looked at the notebook in her hands. Someone who needed a listener. Someone who felt, she stopped. Oh. What? Harry said. She was very still. Ginny Weasley has been off since September, she said quietly. Withdrawn. Pale. She keeps checking her hands like there's something on them she can't see. She looked up at Harry. She came to Hogwarts lonely and frightened and excited, and she has 5 older brothers and she's been overshadowed her whole life. Harry felt it settle. The cold clarity of pieces completing. Ginny. Of course. First year, youngest child, first Weasley daughter in generations, arrived to a school full of her brother's reputations with a second-hand everything and a diary that listened. A 50-year-old piece of Tom Riddle's soul, practiced and patient and very good at being exactly what a lonely 11-year-old needed. She doesn't know, Harry said. She's not choosing it. No, Hermione said fiercely. She's not. We need to get the diary away from her before Riddle takes over completely, Hermione finished. Yes. They looked at each other across Colin Creevy's petrified form, and between them the plan took its shape, not yet fully formed, not every step visible, but the direction clear. Harry put his hand briefly over Hermione's, which was gripping the notebook hard enough to whiten her knuckles, and she unclenched by degrees. He's using her, Harry said. He's using her the way he used Quirrell. The way he uses everyone. There's a pattern. He paused. The difference is Ginny Weasley is 12 years old and whatever Riddle has told her, whatever he's convinced her of, she still has herself in there. The diary doesn't hollow you out the way possession does, it seduces. She'll still be there. How do you know that? Hermione asked. Because she keeps looking at her hands, Harry said. Something in her knows they've been doing things she didn't choose. That means she's still in there, still noticing. He stood up. Come on. We need Ron. Hermione closed her notebook, stood up, smoothed her robes. Looked at Colin once more with the tight expression that was her version of a promise. Then she followed Harry out of the hospital wing into the corridor that smelled of antiseptic and old stone, and the castle's hidden presence moved in the walls around them, patient and waiting, and the second year turned toward its crisis. Ron took the Ginny information the way he took most things involving his family, with an immediate, visceral response, the color draining from his face, a specific stillness that was the absence of his usual motion, followed almost immediately by decisive purpose. She's in herbology right now, he said. Third period. We can't go get her in the middle of class, Hermione said. Watch me, Ron said, standing up. Ron. Harry's voice was calm. Ron stopped. Getting her now means having the conversation in a corridor in the middle of the school day, with 30 other students nearby and Lockhart's classroom 20 feet away. She'll be embarrassed and defensive and it will be harder. Ron sat back down with visible effort. Tonight? Tonight, Harry said. After dinner. You'll bring her to the common room early, the two of you, naturally, nobody else watching. I'll already be there. We keep it easy, keep it slow. She trusts you. She trusts me, Ron said, and the weight in it was clear, the specific weight of a sibling realizing their sibling needed them in a way they hadn't anticipated. She's been weird all term and I thought it was first-year stuff. It started as first-year stuff, Harry said. The diary made it worse. Can you fix it? Ron said, and the question had everything in it, the worry, the trust, the blunt honest need to know. Harry was quiet for a moment. I can get the diary away from her, he said carefully. What the diary's done to her over the course of months, the influence, the dreams, the gaps in memory, that takes longer. But she'll have herself back. The door closes when the diary is gone. That's enough, Ron said. Not resigned, certain. That evening went almost exactly as Harry had laid it out. Ron brought Ginny in early, easy and natural, talking about something to do with a Chudley Cannons game while Ginny, who didn't follow Quidditch as a rule, answered in the automatic monosyllables of someone operating on partial attention. She sat down by the fire and Ron sat next to her and Harry, who was already there with a book, looked up as if only mildly registering their arrival. Hi Ginny, he said. Hi Harry, she said, and then the automatic social response concluded and she looked at her hands. Harry watched this. The hand-looking was exactly as Hermione had described, a glance downward, quick, searching, then away. The gesture of someone checking for evidence of something they half remembered. He let the silence settle for a moment. Let the fire be warm. Let it be just 3 people in a comfortable room, because Ginny Weasley had been managed and manipulated by a piece of Tom Riddle's soul for 2 months and what she needed first was to not be managed. Ginny, Harry said, gently, can I ask you something? She looked up. The diary, he said. The one you've been writing in. Can you tell me about it? The response was immediate, color flooding her face, then draining, hands gripping each other in her lap. She looked at Ron, who met her eyes with the open, unjudging look that was his natural mode, and Harry saw her read it correctly, saw her understand that Ron wasn't here to accuse her of anything. How did you, she started. It doesn't matter how, Harry said. Just tell me. She told them. Haltingly at first, then with increasing speed as the words found their path, the way she'd found it in her cauldron on the first day, the way it had written back, the way Tom's voice in the pages had been warm and interested and had said things like I understand and tell me more with the consistency of something that never got tired of listening. The way she told it everything. The way the gaps had started, waking up in places she didn't remember going, finding her hands dirty, finding herself cold in the middle of the day for no reason. The way she tried to get rid of it and found she couldn't. She was crying by the time she finished. Not dramatically, small, steady tears, the kind that come when the thing you've been holding finally has somewhere to go. "You're not in trouble," Ron said, firmly and immediately. "None of this is your fault." "Yeah." She looked at him. He said it again. She nodded once. Harry leaned forward. "The diary, where is it now?" She reached into the front pocket of her robes and produced it. Harry looked at it, small, black, TM Riddle in faded gold on the cover, ordinary looking in every way. He reached out and took it from her gently and held it in his hands and felt what was inside it, a fragment of Tom Riddle, 50 years old, sophisticated and angry, pressing against the boundary of the diary's pages with the specific force of something that knew it had been interrupted. It knew who was holding it. Harry felt the recognition the same way he'd felt it in Quirrell's office, that cold, complex attention. But this fragment was older made than the one in his scar had been, and it had been active for 2 months, and it was not weak. "Well," said the presence in the pages, which Harry felt as a vibration rather than heard. "You again." "Yes," Harry said, quietly and out loud, because there was no need to pretend. Ginny made a small sound. Ron put his arm around her shoulders. "She's mine," the fragment said. The possessiveness of it was absolute and particular and very Tom Riddle, the orphan boy who had never had anything of his own and had responded to this by making everything his. "She told me everything. I know her better than anyone." "You know what she gave you," Harry said. "That's not the same thing." "What are you going to do, boy? Burn it? Stab it? The last time you touched something of mine you needed the Lord of the Dead himself to extract it." "The Lord of the Dead is my father," Harry said simply, "and I've learned a few things since I was 4. He opened the diary. The pages were filled with writing, Ginny's in blue, looping, increasingly desperate as the months went on, and the responses in black, neat and deliberate and never what she actually needed and always convincing her it was. Harry turned to the last page and held the diary flat in his hands and looked at what was written there, and breathed, and let the Heka come up through his center the way Isis had taught him, not from effort, not from anger, from the same place the love came from, the foundational place. He pressed his thumb to the last page. The diary fought. The fragment pushed back with everything it had, not pain exactly, but pressure, the specific pushing force of a soul anchor resisting destruction, and Harry felt it the way you feel a current in water when you're standing in a river. He held his position. He let the Heka move through the pages, finding the threads of soul fragment that had wound through the paper over 50 years, following them to their anchor points, and worked with the patience and precision Isis had spent 7 years installing in him. The pages began to smoke. Not fire, dissolution. The diary's pages going not black but transparent, the ink and the soul fragment that had given the ink its malevolence fading together, the object releasing what it had been holding with increasing desperation and then, suddenly, completely. The way a fist unclenches. The diary was empty. It was just a book. Harry set it on the table. His hands were steady. The room was warm and quiet. Ginny was staring at him. She looked like someone who had just put down a very heavy bag after a very long walk, shaky, light, real in a way she hadn't been for 2 months. "Is it?" she started. "It's gone," Harry said. "That fragment is gone. I could always feel it," she said quietly. "Even when I wasn't writing to it. Like something sitting just behind my eyes." She touched her own face gently. "It's gone." "Yes." She looked at the diary. At Harry. "Will you? I don't want it near me." "I'll deal with it," Harry said. He looked at Ron, who was watching his sister with an expression of concentrated love and residual fury, not at Ginny, never at Ginny, at the thing that had used her, and said, "Take her to bed, Ron. Make sure she eats breakfast tomorrow." "Obviously," Ron said, and the word was tender. They went upstairs. Harry sat alone by the fire with the empty diary in his hands. He turned it over once. The damage done to Ginny Weasley over 2 months would take time to heal, the gaps in memory, the dreams, the particular violation of having your most intimate thoughts used as fuel by a predatory intelligence. She would need time, and she would need people who didn't treat her like something that had been broken. She had Ron. She had the whole Weasley machinery of loud, uncomplicated love. She would be all right. Harry put the diary in his bag. There were still 5 Horcruxes left, 4 objects and the piece of Voldemort that was still attached to what remained of his living form, somewhere in Albania or further, waiting and rebuilding. He had 2 of the fragments now, accounted for and dealt with. The shape of the larger work was becoming clearer, a map with most of the territory still blank but the edges starting to resolve. He reached across to the Duat, just the light contact, just enough to feel Osiris on the other side, and sent the shape of what had happened tonight, the fragment's dissolution, Ginny's recovery, the state of the board. Osiris received it. Sent back something that was less a response than an acknowledgement, the felt sense of a nod, of careful attention, of the scales in the Hall of Two Truths being updated with new information. Harry felt something else too, from a different direction, from Isis, who was closer tonight than she'd been in weeks, her presence warm and very specifically focused on him. The quality of her attention was different from her usual check-ins, the general warmth of a mother keeping a peripheral eye on a child who is capable of managing their own affairs but whose welfare you nevertheless monitor because that is simply what you do. Tonight it was more direct. More intent. What? He sent. The response came in the impression form that distance required. Not words but meaning-shaped feeling, you're doing well. I wanted you to know I see it. Harry sat with this for a moment. It was not a small thing, to be seen by Isis, who saw truly, who measured against the oldest standard, who had watched him learn and grow and choose for 11 years with the comprehensive attention of a goddess who also happened to be his mother. To be told by her that he was doing well. Not performing well, not succeeding strategically, not meeting external benchmarks. Doing well. Living correctly. Moving with Ma'at. He sent back what he felt, which didn't need complicated packaging, gratitude, love, the simple gladness of being known. He sat by the fire until it was late. He thought about Ginny's hands checking themselves for evidence. He thought about the fragment dissolving under his thumb. He thought about the 4 remaining anchors and the living piece and the work ahead. He thought about Tom Riddle at 11 years old in an orphanage, finding magic for the first time, and the fear that had been underneath everything from the very beginning, and how that fear had grown like a weed through every decision the man had ever made until the weed was the architecture and there was no longer any Tom Riddle underneath it, just the weed, just the fear wearing a name. He thought about what Osiris had said. Every soul is what it chose. He did not pity Voldemort. But he did not stop understanding him either, because understanding was not absolution, it was just accurate sight, and accurate sight was the foundation of everything, of Heka, of judgment, of the love Isis had taught him that was not soft but was the oldest and strongest thing in any world. The fire went out. Harry went to bed. Somewhere in the walls, the basilisk moved. Chapter 6, Ma'at's reckoning. The Chamber of Secrets smelled like old water and older stone and something alive that had not seen sunlight in 1,000 years. Harry found the entrance on a Thursday. He had known it was the bathroom, had known for weeks, had felt the structural wrongness in the plumbing every time he walked that section of the second-floor corridor. What he hadn't confirmed was the specific mechanism. That came from Myrtle, who told him while crying, which was how Myrtle did everything, sitting on the edge of her flooded sink at 2 in the morning while Harry sat on the bathroom floor across from her and listened with genuine attention rather than the polite performance of listening that most people directed at Myrtle and that she could detect immediately and had learned to resent. She told him about the voice. The hissing in the pipes. She told him about the night 50 years ago when she had died in this bathroom, looking at a pair of great yellow eyes near a tap that was different from the other taps. Harry looked at the tap. He looked at the small snake engraved on its side. He looked at it for a long moment while Myrtle watched him with the curious attention of a ghost who had been in this bathroom for 50 years and had resigned herself to being either ignored or briefly acknowledged, and what Harry did that she didn't expect was look at her and say, "Thank you, Myrtle. That was helpful." She blinked. The incorporeal equivalent of blinking, a shift in her expression that was surprise and something warmer underneath it. "Most people don't, I know," he said. "I'm sorry they don't. You were very clear." He left before she started crying again, because gratitude affected Myrtle more than dismissal and he didn't have time to sit with the full weight of it tonight. He took the stairs down at a measured pace, working through the mechanics, a tap with a snake engraved, which meant it responded to Parseltongue, which meant Slytherin had built the chamber accessible only to his own direct descendants or someone who could speak to serpents. Harry knew 17 languages. Parseltongue was not one of them. He thought about this with the calm pragmatism of someone who encountered gaps in capability and treated them as logistical problems rather than insurmountable obstacles. He went to the library. He found a text on linguistic magic, on the principle of sympathetic sound resonance, on the way certain magical languages could be approximated by someone who understood their acoustic structure well enough, which was a technique Thoth had used in very early texts to describe how the first utterances of magical speech had worked before the words were words, when they were just shaped breath that meant things because the breather meant them. He spent 4 days learning the phonetic skeleton of Parseltongue from 3 different sources, cross-referenced, annotated by himself in the margins in the way Thoth had taught him to annotate, everything useful, nothing wasted, the page as a working space rather than a record. On the 5th day he went back to the bathroom, stood in front of the tap, and spoke. The sink moved. He told Ron and Hermione that evening. All of it, the tap, the mechanism, the descent available now that he knew how to open it. He had not gone down yet. He had looked into the pipe, felt the shape of the space below with his awareness, registered the basilisk as a cold enormous presence far down in the dark, and come back. Ron's expression moved through several stages. "You taught yourself Parseltongue." "The acoustic framework of it," Harry said. "Enough to trigger the tap's enchantment." "In 4 days. Thoth is a good teacher," Harry said. "He drilled phonological analysis into me since I was 8. The actual learning was just applying existing tools." Ron looked at Hermione, who looked back at Ron with an expression that was somewhere between resigned and proud. "Obviously," she said, not entirely sarcastically. "The basilisk is still down there," Harry said. "The diary is destroyed, the fragment operating it is gone. But the chamber was opened and the basilisk was directed. It might continue acting on the last instructions given, or it might have retreated to its resting state. I won't know until I'm down there." "Then we go down there," Ron said. "You're not going down," Harry said. Ron opened his mouth. "I need you up here," Harry said, and his voice was even and clear and completely without condescension, which was the only reason Ron closed his mouth again. "Not as a consolation. I need you up here because if something goes wrong that I haven't accounted for, someone who knows everything needs to be able to go to Dumbledore with the full picture. Not a partial version, not a version filtered through panic, the full picture." He paused. "That's you. That's an important job." Ron was quiet for a moment. "And Hermione?" Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry with the expression that had developed over 2 years of friendship, the one that said she was doing the full calculation, weighing what she wanted against what she knew, measuring her own capability against the problem's specific demands. "I'm more useful up here too," she said, and the honest precision of the acknowledgement was something Harry thought only Hermione could have managed. "The basilisk kills with direct sight. My reflexes for that situation aren't." She stopped. "You have a different relationship to death than I do." "Yes," Harry said simply. "So you go alone." "I go alone," he said. "Then, I'll be back for dinner." Ron made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something less steady. "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you're nipping out for milk," Ron said. You're going into a 1,000-year-old underground snake den that's already killed at least once. I'll be back for dinner, Harry said again, warmly this time, and the warmth in it was real. He went down on a Saturday morning, early enough that the corridors were empty and the bathroom was dark, the grey September light barely touching the high windows. He opened the tap with the same shaped breath as before and stood at the edge of the pipe entrance and looked down into the dark. He dropped in. The descent was long and cold and smelled increasingly of deep water and ancient stone. He landed in a pile of animal bones and small creature remains that crunched under his feet, which he took in with the information-gathering efficiency of someone assessing an environment and filed away. The tunnel stretched ahead, supported by stone pillars carved with snakes, the walls wet and green with centuries of moisture. Torches that had probably been unlit for 50 years caught briefly as he passed, something in his own magical field activating the old enchantments in the stone, the castle recognizing something in him that made the lights come on. He walked. The basilisk was ahead. He could feel it the way he could feel the diary fragment before he destroyed it, a large cold presence, scaled and old, ancient in the specific way that creatures who lived in isolation for centuries became ancient, built up in layers. It was not moving. It was between states, not asleep exactly, not actively hunting, but in the reduced consciousness of a creature whose directive had recently collapsed and had not yet been replaced. Harry thought about this as he walked. The basilisk had been here for 1,000 years. Slytherin had created it or imported it or found it, the texts weren't specific, and housed it here with the purpose of purging the school of Muggleborns when called upon. It had been called twice. Both times by someone under the influence of the diary. Without the diary's directive, it was simply an enormous serpent in a very old basement. He turned a corner and found it. The basilisk was 60 feet long, thick as an oak tree, olive green and black in the torchlight, coiled at the far end of the chamber proper, which was a vast pillared space with a stone face of Slytherin at its end, mouth gaping wide, the open passage of the chamber's deepest point. The basilisk's head was the size of a small car. Its eyes were closed. Harry stood at the chamber's entrance and looked at it and felt, as he always felt in the presence of things very old and very powerful, a specific quality of respect. Not fear. Respect. The basilisk had been here before anyone currently alive had been born. It had waited, blind and patient in the dark, for 1,000 years between its two callings. That was not nothing. He spoke to it. Not Parseltongue, his approximation of the acoustic framework was sufficient for enchanted locks but not for actual serpent speech, and the basilisk was old enough and sophisticated enough that the difference would be felt. He spoke in the old language, the Kemetic root speech, the first language of magic in which Isis had taught him that meaning was sound and sound was magic and the gap between words and spells was a human invention rather than a fundamental truth. The basilisk opened its eyes. Harry had already looked at the stone floor. In the Kemetic texts, in the accounts of serpents that killed with their gaze, there was a consistent thread: the gaze killed the mortal by disconnecting it from the animating principle, the ka, the vital energy, the thing that made a living thing alive rather than matter arranged in the shape of a living thing. A direct gaze was total disconnection. A reflection was partial, disorienting, damaging, but not fatal, because the reflection bent the mechanism. Harry's gaze was on the floor. His awareness was everywhere else. "Old one," he said, in the root speech. "You have been here long." The basilisk regarded the top of his head from 60 feet away. Its breathing, if that was the right word for the slow massive exhalations of something that size, moved the air in the chamber with each cycle. A sound came from it. Not Parseltongue exactly, something older, something that lived under language, the root sound of serpent speech in the way that root speech lived under human magic. Harry received it not as words but as meaning, directly. "You are not the heir." Flat statement, no aggression. Assessment. "No," Harry said. "You are not human." Another statement. More uncertain at its edges. "Partly," Harry said. "I was born human. I was raised by something older." A long stillness. The torchlight moved in the wet air. The small one who called me is gone. Her voice is gone. The diary that was directing her is destroyed, Harry said. She didn't know what she was doing. She was used. The basilisk processed this with the patience of something that had been still for 50 years and found no particular difference between processing time and waiting time. The school is frightened. People were hurt. I know. That needs to stop. What calls me now? The basilisk said, and the meaning under the root sound was clear: the air is gone, the directive is gone, the calling voice is gone. What remains? What does this creature owe to this chamber and this school and this century? What is the basilisk, when the architecture of its purpose collapses? Harry stood up from his crouch, slowly, carefully, keeping his face angled toward the floor. He felt the basilisk tracking him without the tracking being aggression. Pure attention. The oldest kind. Nothing calls you, Harry said. You're free of the directive. What you do next is your own. Another long stillness. I have been here 1,000 years, the basilisk said, and the meaning was layered, not complaint, not mourning exactly, something more fundamental. The specific statement of a creature accounting for its own existence: I have been here 1,000 years and I was made to serve a purpose and the purpose was wrong and I served it anyway and now the purpose is gone. I know, Harry said quietly. That's a hard thing to carry. You have been in the place of the dead, the basilisk said. The certainty in the root sound was absolute. Yes. Does it wait for me? Harry thought about Osiris. About the Hall of Two Truths and the scales and the 42 assessors and the feather of Maat. About what Osiris had told him once, that every soul that had ever lived was part of the accounting, that the scales were patient because they had all the time that had ever been and the weighing was never rushed. Everything that lives has a place in the accounting, Harry said. What you were made for is not the same as what you chose. That distinction matters. A very long silence. The torches breathed. I am tired, the basilisk said. Harry stayed where he was on the stone floor, speaking to something ancient and enormous in the dark, and he did not rush it, because this moment had been waiting for 1,000 years and deserved its full weight. I can help with that, he said. If you want. He felt the basilisk's attention settle. The massive body shifted, not toward him, just a repositioning, a settling, the way very large creatures settle when they have decided something. Yes, it said. Harry raised his head. He looked at the floor, at the wall, at the middle distance. He reached across to the Duat, not just the light contact, the full opening, the deliberately thin membrane, and he let Osiris feel what was in the room. Let the presence of the Hall of Two Truths extend into this underground space the way light extends through a cracked door, not flooding in, just present, just enough. He felt Osiris's response, the quality of attention directed, the scales in the hall shifting to accommodate something new. Felt the assessors turning toward this point in the world. Felt the door between the Chamber of Secrets and the Duat become, for one moment, very thin. The basilisk exhaled. It was not a sound. It was a cessation, the stopping of something that had been moving very slowly for a very long time. The enormous coiled body didn't crumple or collapse, it simply became still in a way it hadn't been still before, the distinction between the stillness of sleep and the stillness of completion. The chamber went quiet. Harry sat on the stone floor for a moment, alone in the underground dark, and felt the basilisk's presence move through the thin place between worlds and felt Osiris receive it on the other side with the specific gravity he brought to every soul, complete attention, no hierarchy, no judgment before the weighing, just the patient readiness of a lord who had been doing this since before the first human ever feared the dark. He sat there for a while. Then he got up, walked back through the tunnel, climbed up through the pipe, and emerged in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom into the grey Saturday morning. Myrtle was there. You went down, she said. Yes. Is it? It's over, Harry said. The basilisk is gone. The chamber is empty. She looked at him for a long moment. Nobody ever actually fixed it before, she said, with the specific tone of someone who had been in a position to observe many years of not fixing and had made her peace with it. They just contained it. Or ignored it. Or left. I know, Harry said. Why didn't you? He picked up his bag from where he'd left it by the sinks. Because it needed fixing, he said simply, and went to breakfast. Dumbledore's office smelled of something sweet, a bowl of candies on the desk, a fire in the grate, sunlight through the windows making the silver instruments on the shelves glint in complicated ways. The portraits of former headmasters were awake and interested in the way that suggested the castle's intelligence network had already briefed them on recent events, which Harry had long suspected was exactly how that worked. He sat in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk and waited. Dumbledore came in from a side door and stopped when he saw Harry, which was becoming a pattern, arriving to find Harry already in position, already settled, already having arranged his own presence in the space rather than being arranged by it. He sat down behind his desk and looked at Harry and said nothing for a moment. "The Chamber of Secrets has been sealed," Harry said. "Permanently. The basilisk is gone." Dumbledore placed his hands on the desk. "Gone. Gone to the Duat. I facilitated it." He paused. It was ready. It had been used for something wrong and it knew it and it was tired of existing in that context. "I gave it access to the threshold." Dumbledore was quiet. "Then, the diary. Destroyed 3 weeks ago. I should have told you immediately, I apologize for that. I wanted to make sure Ginny was recovering before I brought it to official attention." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "She's recovering. The influence is gone. She'll need time and care and I'd recommend she's not asked to give a formal account to anyone for at least another month. The process of recounting it before she's ready will do more damage than the original event." Dumbledore absorbed this. "You're telling me how to care for my students." "I'm telling you what the experience of being influenced by a soul fragment does to a person," Harry said. "I have some relevant context on that, as you know." Dumbledore's expression moved. "Not much," he was very controlled, "but enough. The fragment in the scar. I was 4 when it was removed. I don't have clear memory of the influence period. But I have Osiris's account of what it looked like from the outside, and it looked like Ginny. The checking of hands. The looking for evidence of things you half remember doing." He paused. "She's fine. She will be fine. I just want her handled correctly." "Of course," Dumbledore said quietly. And then, after a moment, Tom Riddle made the diary. "In his 5th year here," Harry said. He was 16. It was his first Horcrux. "I've dealt with 2 now, the diary fragment and the one from my scar. There are 5 remaining." The office was very quiet. The silver instruments ticked and glinted and the portraits leaned slightly forward. Dumbledore was looking at Harry with the expression that had appeared the night of the stone, that complex, careful, old expression of a man revising something very large. "You know about the Horcruxes," Dumbledore said. "I've known for a year," Harry said. "Osiris explained the mechanics to me. Soul magic, soul anchors, the structural cost of making one. Each time he made one the remaining soul became less capable of good judgment, less capable of accurate self-knowledge. He made more than he intended. He lost count of himself." He looked at Dumbledore. "You know too. You've suspected for years." "I have been cautious," Dumbledore said. "About confirming it. About beginning a course of action that could not be easily reversed," Harry finished. "Yes. I understand that." He held the word cautious in his mouth for a moment, tasting it for the thing underneath it, because there were several things underneath it and he wanted to address the right one. "Professor. I need to ask you something directly." "You may." "The plan you had for me. The one where the Horcrux in my scar is the last one destroyed, and the destroying of it requires my death." He watched Dumbledore's face very carefully. You've been building toward that. Not cruelly, I don't think it's cruel, I think you genuinely believed it was necessary and that the sacrifice was meaningful and that you were doing the best possible thing with an impossible equation. But the plan requires me to die. Dumbledore was very still. The scar is clean, Harry said. Has been since I was 4. Osiris removed the fragment then. The piece of Voldemort that you've been calculating around, it's already dealt with. Which means the equation has changed. He paused. Which means I don't have to die. The silence that followed was long and full and complex. Dumbledore's face moved through several things, genuine relief was one of them, and it was not a small relief, it was the relief of a man setting down a weight he had been carrying with full knowledge of its cost for over a decade, and genuine disruption of a long-held strategic architecture was another, and underneath both of these was something that was either guilt or the neighbor of guilt, something real and private. I owe you an apology, Dumbledore said. It came out simply, without performance, which made Harry think it had been waiting for a long time. For the cupboard, Harry said. For all of it, Dumbledore said. The cupboard. The plan. Designing a life around a sacrifice that an 11-year-old, that any person, had never been given the opportunity to consent to. He looked at his hands on the desk, then back at Harry. I have told myself for 11 years that the needs of the many, that the prevention of a catastrophic darkness, that, he stopped himself. I have told myself many things that were true and used them to avoid looking at the ones that weren't. Harry looked at him. At the old man behind the desk, genuinely reckoning, not performing reckoning, not managing him, actually sitting in something difficult and staying there. Harry thought about what Isis had told him once, about forgiveness not being for the person forgiven but for the person forgiving, the way you put down a stone you've been carrying that was making you walk crooked. He thought about Osiris's scales and the difference between what a soul chose and what it chose under duress and chose without full knowledge. Dumbledore had chosen without full knowledge of what Harry was. That was true. But he had also chosen knowing enough to be uncomfortable with his own choices, which was a different category. I'm not angry, Harry said. I want to be clear about that. Not because I'm performing equanimity, because I'm actually not angry. You didn't know. You worked with what you had. What I need from you now, what matters now, isn't an accounting of the past. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. It's the Horcruxes. I need your help finding the remaining 5. You've been researching Riddle's history longer than I've been alive, you know things about what he would have chosen, what objects would have mattered to him, where they'd be hidden. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, 5 remaining. The locket. The cup. The ring. The diadem. He paused. And Voldemort himself. He's his own last Horcrux, Harry confirmed. The piece of soul that survived as a wraith in Albania, that's the final fragment. Everything else needs to be gone before I deal with that one directly. And you intend to deal with it directly? Yes. Alone. Not alone, Harry said. With better support than you had planned, and with Osiris at the threshold. When I bring the last fragment to the Hall of Two Truths, there'll be a full accounting. He paused. A proper judgment. The way it should have happened decades ago if someone hadn't built walls against every door. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. At the boy, at Harry, who was 12 and whatever 7 years in the Duat made him, who had walked into the Chamber of Secrets alone on a Saturday morning and come back in time for lunch, who was sitting in the headmaster's office explaining the remaining strategic architecture of a decades-long magical crisis with the calm and clarity of someone who had been thinking about it for longer than the conversation. What do you need from me? Dumbledore said. Harry pulled out Hermione's notebook. She had given it to him that morning with all her research compiled, everything she'd built over 2 years with her instincts sharpened against his knowledge, the most comprehensive private survey of Voldemort's Horcrux architecture in existence. He opened it to the page she'd marked and put it on the desk between them. Everything you know about Hepzibah Smith, Harry said. And the objects she owned. Dumbledore looked at the notebook. Then he got up, went to his shelves, and came back with 3 books and a folder of papers that he set down next to the notebook, and he sat down, and they began to work. It was late afternoon by the time Harry left the office. The corridors were full of the particular late Saturday energy of a school that had recovered from a siege, students moving freely, talking at volume, the specific collective relief of an anxiety lifted. The petrified victims had been cured with mandrake potion 2 days ago, all of them returned to their dormitories or their houses with the vaguely dazed quality of people waking up in the middle of a story they'd missed several chapters of. Colin Creevey had immediately asked Harry if he could take his photograph, which Harry had permitted with a patience that Hermione found endearing and Ron found heroic. He found them in the courtyard, Hermione sitting on the low wall with a book, Ron beside her eating what appeared to be a sandwich approximately the size of his own head, both of them visible from the corridor door without him having to look very hard. They looked up when he came through the door into the grey afternoon light. "How was it?" Hermione asked. "Long," Harry said. "Productive." He sat down on the wall beside Ron, who wordlessly held out the other half of his sandwich, which Harry took. "He knows about the Horcruxes. Has been researching them for years. He has information on the remaining 4 objects that we didn't have, specific provenance, acquisition history, likely current locations." Hermione had her notebook out before he finished the sentence. "How specific?" "Specific enough to be useful. The locket's the most complicated, it changed hands several times after Hepzibah Smith, there's a theft involved and a cover-up, it'll take tracing." He looked at her. He also confirmed the ring. His family home, the Gaunt house, in Little Hangleton. He thinks the ring is still there. Hermione wrote rapidly. "And the diadem. Lost since the Middle Ages. Everyone believes it's gone forever." Harry ate a piece of the sandwich. "It isn't." "How do you know?" "Because Voldemort was a student here," Harry said. "And he was exactly the kind of student who would find a 1,000-year-old founder's artifact and use it as a hiding place. It's somewhere in the castle. Dumbledore doesn't know where, but he confirmed it came back to Hogwarts with Rowena Ravenclaw's daughter in the 12th century and never definitively left." "The castle," Ron said. He looked up at Hogwarts, at its towers and irregular roofline and the 1,000 rooms and passages that made up its accumulated architecture. "It's somewhere in this building." "Yes." "This building we live in." "Yes." Ron took a large bite of his sandwich and chewed it thoughtfully. "Right. Well. We've got years." "We do," Harry agreed. "And Dumbledore's helping now." "Yes." "Properly?" "Not," Ron made a gesture that communicated several things about the year's experience of being adjacent to institutional decisions without being consulted about them. "Properly," Harry said. "He understands the situation has changed. He's adjusting. It's not seamless, he's been running a specific strategy for 20 years and that strategy has inertia. But he's adjusting genuinely." Hermione looked up from her notes. "And the basilisk," she said. "You haven't told us about the basilisk." "It went to the Duat," Harry said. "It was ready. Osiris received it." She held his gaze for a moment. "How was that? Being down there?" He thought about the chamber. The torchlight. The enormous coiled presence in the dark. The exhausted clarity of a creature that had been used for something wrong and had known it and had waited 1,000 years for someone to come down and acknowledge it. "It was okay," he said quietly. It needed to happen. The basilisk needed someone to talk to it like it was real. Like its experience mattered. He paused. A lot of things in this world just need that, it turns out. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the careful honesty of someone who has chosen directness over sentiment because they think both parties are better served by it, "Harry. You went into a chamber with a lethal serpent alone. You persuaded it to die peacefully. You destroyed a piece of Voldemort's soul with your bare hands. You convinced Dumbledore to restructure a 20-year strategy over the course of an afternoon. She paused. I'm your friend. I'm entirely on your side. But I need to ask, what is the plan for the rest of it? Not right now, not this year. The long shape of it. Harry looked at her. At the dark, clear, entirely serious eyes that had been tracking his thinking since the Hogwarts Express in first year and had never once asked him to be something simpler than he was. He looked at Ron, who was looking back at him with the matching seriousness that Ron kept mostly behind the easy manner, the seriousness that had said I'll be here in the common room after the stone and had said nothing but meant the same thing 100 times since. The long shape, Harry said, is this: we find the remaining Horcruxes, the 4 objects, over however long it takes, with whatever resources we can build. Each one I deal with directly. The diary method, Heka, dissolution, proper judgment, is the right approach. It's slower than stabbing something with a basilisk fang, but it's better in every way that actually matters. Why better? Hermione said. Because it accounts for them, Harry said. Because part of what makes Voldemort what he is that he has never been properly accounted for. His whole life he's been operating outside any real reckoning, outside love, outside death, outside judgment. Every time he's been stopped by force and force alone, and force doesn't resolve anything, it just delays. He looked at the castle wall behind them. When I bring the last piece of him to Osiris and the scales weigh what's left of Tom Riddle, that's a resolution. That's a real ending. Not just a defeat. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. You feel sorry for him, she said. Not an accusation. The observation of someone who has been paying attention and followed the thread all the way to its end. No, Harry said, and it was honest. I understand him. That's different. You can understand something completely and still know it needs to stop. Ron leaned back on his hands and looked up at the sky, which was going the deep blue-grey of late afternoon in Scotland. Years, he said again, to himself or the sky. We're doing this for years. Yes, Harry said. We'll need better snacks, Ron said. My mum can send, Ron, Hermione said. I'm serious, sustained fieldwork requires caloric, Ron. Fine. He lowered his gaze from the sky and looked at them both. His face was relaxed and warm and completely decided. Years it is. Where do we start? Harry thought about Dumbledore's folder of papers. About the gaunt house in Little Hangleton, in a hollow in the hills, where a gold ring sat in a ruin waiting to be found. About the locket changing hands through a chain of theft and cover-up that led somewhere familiar. About the diadem hidden somewhere in this building they slept in every night. About the cup, the Lestranges, the vault they'd need to think carefully about. About the years of work ahead and the friends on either side of him and Isis's voice in the back of his mind warm and constant as it had always been, and Osiris somewhere in the deep structure of existence patient as stone, and the feather of Maat that tipped the scales, and the love that was older than all of it and louder than all of it and had been the loudest thing in his life since a woman set her face against a door and refused to move. Little Hangleton, Harry said. When we're ready. The ring first. Hermione wrote it down. The 3 of them sat in the courtyard as the afternoon went dark and the castle lit its windows one by one and the school moved around them toward dinner with no idea what was being planned in its own yard by 3 second-years and a disapproving owl, and the stars came out over Scotland in 1s and 2s, and Harry looked up at them with the specific comfort of someone who had been taught by the god of scribes that the stars were records and by the goddess of magic that the records were love. And by the Lord of the Dead that nothing that had ever mattered was truly lost. He was 12 years old. He was whatever the Duat had made him. He was exactly where he had chosen to be, with exactly the people he had chosen to be with, and the work ahead was long and the work ahead was difficult and the work ahead was his. Dinner was calling from somewhere in the warm interior of the castle, and Ron was already standing, and Hermione was closing her notebook with the decisive snap of someone who has done enough thinking for one evening and was ready to think about food, and Harry stood up from the wall and felt, as he always felt in the moments before movement, in the breath before the next step, the shape of everything ahead. It was not small. It was not simple. It was not frightening. He followed his friends inside.